All right, we are live. Thank you, everyone, for your patience today as we had a couple of different unrelated issues as we are trying to get ready to go live. First, my automated driver for Chrome was out of date because of a recent Chrome update. And then when I finally got that resolved and I tried to add Mary to the scene, her camera was not there. We were getting her audio, but not her camera, even though on the preview I could see it, it wasn't actually going out on what would have been the broadcast. Rebooting seemed to fix that problem. So here we are live, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Today, we are going to be talking about some of the gods of pre-Islamic Arabia. We're going to be tying these gods together with the ancient god of Baal found in the Bible. You may recognize him from the battle that Elijah had, where he challenged the false prophets and they were unable to demonstrate themselves, while the true God proved that his prophet was legitimate. And then we'll tie them in with Allah as well and see how the pagan system has been handed down from generation to generation. Anything you'd like to say as an introduction, Mary?
Not very much, except I'm super blurry and we have no idea why. And we'll have to fix it some other time because this is just what we're going to have today, I guess.
Yeah.
Very odd.
Yeah, and
I've
so
never been like this
far
before.
the bot doesn't seem to have. It says it's connected, but it hasn't updated reset the stats on the likes and chats from the previous one, and it's saying 0 people watching, which obviously is not the case. So not quite sure what is up with any of that. If it doesn't resolve itself here in a minute, then I'll just turn the stats off. We will not be defeated, right? We will not be defeated.
Yep, that's really funny. All right. So yeah, we're just gonna find out. There are a bunch of things that you've probably heard about Allah, and that seem like they ought to be true. Some of them are, some of them aren't, and we're gonna go. We're gonna go into that and figure out what's true and what's not. And yes, I know it looks blurry to you guys. My camera is not blurry. My camera is not blurry. There's something in the feed that's messed up. Okay, so it's just the way it's going to be this time. I'm appearing perfectly clearly on the preview, and then whenever it goes to the main like pre-feed, it's messed up, and my connection's great. I have very, very, very good internet, so I don't know what's up. So anyway, we have a fun little preview since we're talking about the Kaaba and other things. I saw something that made me giggle like a little maniac today, or the other day, and so I wanted to share it with all of you so that you could enjoy it too. And just imagine that there's like music over this. Islamic, like pious Islamic music.
Yeah, well, the short, the little
this.
YouTube short definitely did have some music. I wouldn't have called it like pious Islamic music. I think it would probably be okay, but just in case, I don't want the whole stream to be all the ad revenue to go to some random other person. So we'll play it without sound. It's just music anyway.
These are the luckiest people alive. Do you see in the background? That is the Kaaba. They're the luckiest people because they get to clean the Kaaba. We're going to find out something else they do. They power wash. Asafa and Alwar.
And I have, I have a second video
of
a longer version of the power wash here. Doesn't seem like the greatest idea in the world to me. This is a sacred holy rock, and they're blasting it with high-powered water, which
it was outside for decades or generations, thousands of years.
But
right?
over time, that will definitely break it down. So, whatever.
Well, until they until they cordoned it off, Muhammad's actual activity was to run across it, climb to the top, shout Alhamdulillah or something, climb back down, and while running, chant other invocations, and then climb up the other one. So they were climbing up to the top of each of these until they realized that with all these hundreds of people, everyone's going to die if they do that. So they decided
So
not to do that
Houston
anymore.
says they would have a
So,
good curling team, and they were doing some nice gliding there on the wet ground. Even for a devout Muslim, though, I don't think that cleaning the ground at the Kaaba would be the greatest job in the world, but who knows, right? Maybe like being the tour guide or something. That might be great if you're a devout Muslim, but just cleaning the floors, I don't know. Very strange stuff. I did have a quick super chat from Jack Ray, and I bet you there's going to be a small delay with everything running super slow for some reason. Or not. And there should be no reason why this would be delayed because it's completely local. So I just don't know what is going on with my stuff today. But thank you for that super chat, Jack Ray, and I'll try it later to see if we can get the video to play. Mike says that Uthman got physical with Avery from God Logic. I had not heard that yet. Uh, do you know what he's referring to, Mary? And we can no longer hear you.
oh, there it is. Ah, that was actually me. Yeah, I was just checking on that. He hasn't posted anything. He was on TikTok earlier today, so that must have just happened. Uh, so, anyway, we can check it out after the stream's over. So, yeah, I figured that he'll do like chest bumping nonsense because that's Uthman. He likes to pretend that he's both an A+ scholar and also he was totally in a gang
Hmm.
because you know these two work together
Yeah,
very
and
well, right?
his description of being in a
Oh,
gang, I mean, I found that to be totally credible in every possible way. Wait, no, that's not what I found at all. Oh, sorry. I don't know why. I don't know why he wants to pretend he was in a gang, but I certainly didn't find it very plausible, his description of it. In any case, we don't really
all right.
care about Uthman. We want to find out about Hubal.
Brothers and sisters, why to lose this great opportunity? Remember, when the person is on his deathbed, the last minute, he will ask Allah Jalla wa ala to be delayed for 1 second to do what? Not to pray, not to do other things, but to give sadaqah. Because sadaqah, you can give it just like this, yeah, in 1 second.
All right, so I actually do see what happened. It was trying to connect to the API for the software that we connect through, and it eventually timed out that it couldn't connect to it. But while it was trying, nothing else was happening. So seems to be some sort of problem there. We'll do our best to get through it today, but thank you again for that donation. All right. So looks like it might be a bit of a rocky stream. Hopefully the audio at least is all good so that we don't have any major issues with that.
Good. My presentation is coming through okay, and if my tiny little face is all blurry, I guess that's fine. No one wants to look at me anyway. All right. So before we start, I do want to clarify something. I've seen several misunderstandings whenever we've been talking about various things in ancient Mecca and moving into Allah being in Mecca, that's kind of important too. There are really three different distinct Meccas that you can talk about. The first one is this purely imaginary, made up Mecca that's in modern popular Islam that really started with kind of the classical, the high Middle Ages, classical age of Islam, where it's the greatest city ever, and it's super rich, and there's spices and insults and gold and incense and gold and endless caravans and all of this stuff, and everybody's rich and wonderful and just wealthy and fabulous, right? This is like the letter by letter, dot by dot Quran preservation, right? No one who has any kind of education in Islam believes it, but most popular Muslims do because people lie to them. So, the next is the primordial Mecca in Islamic sources, right? And this one, there's Adam and Eve, and there's Noah, Abraham and Ishmael were there. All the 300 prophets are buried there. And it is this particular Mecca that the Saudi government knows isn't there and wants to hide. So the Saudi government is not trying to hide Mecca number 1. It's trying to hide the fact that Mecca number 2 doesn't exist. Doesn't care about Mecca number 1. Then there's Mecca number 3 that is the real Mecca, the Mecca of Muhammad's day that's shown in the Islamic sources. And in this Mecca, they are outdoor pooping hillbillies. They live in one-room hovels, live in mud huts. They are one drought away from starvation. They are peripherally important caravan, pagan shrine clan that's attempting to become significant in an increasingly monotheistic world. Okay, so you also have to be careful when you read the Islamic sources. There are a lot of lies in the Islamic sources that attribute polytheism to Christian Arab tribes. These include tribes who were either entirely resisted conversion to Islam for more than 1,000 years, and those who resisted for decades. They'll just say, oh yeah, they totally came to Mecca too. They were polytheistic. This part is pure propaganda. They're trying to cover up and discredit the authentic faith of the Christians whom they were targeting for persecution, because they're trying to protect Muhammad's later image as the one who brought monotheism to the Arabs. If the Arabs, tons of Arabs were already Christian at that time, that really damages the look of Muhammad being the guy who introduced all of this, right? So the Jewish tribes are given some acknowledgement in terms of actually being monotheistic, but the Christian ones, they just pretend that they were like all pagan, even though they weren't, okay? Here's the reality. Paganism was virtually extinct in Bedouin tribes in northern Arabia by AD 400. There is not a single polytheistic inscription in northern Arabia after AD 425 that has yet been found as of today, as far as I can tell, that's been published absolutely anywhere. This is what Al-Jalad, Al-Jalad, I listened to his name like 8 times, Al-Jalad has written about recently. This is his current position, okay, based on thousands of inscriptions, that there are no pagan inscriptions in northern Arabia, even though writing these inscriptions was an important part of the pagan faith in northern Arabia. They're gone by nearly 200 years at this point, okay? So, and I also want everybody to know that Allah has nothing to do with an Egyptian god, okay? And I changed the font here so you can read it really well. Some people have misread Iya or Aya as La, because if you have a sans serif font, the capital I and the capital L look the same, right? And then if they add the al to what they think is Allah, you get Allah. And so they're like, aha, this is an Egyptian moon god. This must be Allah. Then no. This Egyptian moon god, his name is Ea, and his name is not La, and he has nothing at all to do with Islam. So yes, Andrew, we are not getting to the local Christians worshiping icons of Mary and Jesus and all the prophets in the Kaaba yet today. We'll talk about that another day. Today we are just talking about who is the high god of the Kaaba, where's he from, who has he been, and everything else. So we're really just dealing about him, barely going to touch on anybody else peripherally, right? So one place that really gives you a good hint as to where we should be starting is to go to the Quran and see what the Quran identifies as the primordial deities. Who do they think are the most super ancient gods that the most super ancient polytheists worship? And we begin with one assignment that we find in the Quran and a lot of the Islamic sources, that the early religion was essentially the worship of the heavenly bodies, sun, moon, stars, okay? And you'll find this with Abraham. When the night overshadowed, he saw a star and he said, "This is my Lord." But when it said, he said, "I love not those that set." Apparently, Abraham's an adult here, but he's like surprised that stars set. So let's just go with poor Abraham, who's never looked up before in his life. So then when he saw the moon beginning to rise, he said, "This is my Lord." But when he said it, said, "If the Lord guides me not, I shall surely be among the people who err." And then he saw the sun begin to rise, and he said, "This is my Lord." When it said, he said, "Oh, my people, verily I am clear of what ye associate with Allah. Verily I have turned my face to him who created the heaven and the earth," because he never noticed the sun sets before. But anyway, this is kind of assigning these stars and moon and sun and stuff as being their primordial deities. So if we find something that is to do with these astral deities, we shouldn't be surprised. Now, who else is identified? Well, there's a list of the people that the gods that Noah's people worshipped. Okay, Wad, Suwa, Yaguth, Ya'uk, and Nasr. Right? These are 5 that, in Muhammad's mind, are the super duper oldest of all of these.
I'm just glad
gods,
you read
right?
the names and not me. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, fortunately, I don't have to say most of them again because we're about to get rid of most of them. So, Ya'uk is not attested as a deity outside the Quran and Islamic sources. So we do what?
I said, whoops,
You're just
that he's
laughing at the
not
name.
found outside the Quran, right? You know, this deity.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, most likely, because we get this Jewish inscription with that name from Himyar, and it seems to be a place name in this particular inscription. That Ry there, the RY thing is Ryland number. It tells you which inscription it is, so you guys can look it up if you're really fascinated by this, right? And so it's talking about they have built anew the synagogue, and the actual word is the same word as for temple. And this is the name of this temple / synagogue. From its foundations until its summit, its meeting room, its galleries. So they've rebuilt it to be, so built anew, meaning that they've rebuilt something that had previously existed as a heathen pagan temple, and now it's being built to be a synagogue, right? But you can't find anything. I wrote Al-Kabi again. His name is Al-Kabi. Al-Kalbi. It is not Al-Kalbi. I keep forgetting which one he is. So I did write that correctly. Anyway, I can't find anything about the tribe that Al-Kalbi ascribes him to, but Al-Kalbi makes things up. So it's all right. He's known to be a liar. This guy said, "Oh, I memorized the whole Quran in 3 days." So
yeah, very impressive
you know how reliable
there.
this is, right?
Potato Sandwich wants to know if these are Petran deities.
Absolutely not. These are in Yemen, because Muhammad understood the most ancient gods as having come, or this one is from Yemen specifically because Himyar is in Yemen. Okay. Suwa, we have no idea where Suwa is. The root seems to mean equal. It's in the feminine form. She seems to be a consort of a main god just from her name. So, oh, and here I did typo it. Al-Kalbi, he is named the dog of one because after the tribe, right? He claims that she's the god of the Hudhail, who are supposedly the first idolaters ever from Muhammad's tribal Genesis line, right? And that temple was under the guardianship of the Lithyan tribe. But he admits that he's never heard of anyone of Hudhail actually worshiping it. So, and Lithyan is another one of these key places. So Lithyan was the northern kingdom just south of Nabatea, right? So there's Nabatea in the north, Lithyan interfaces with it, and then the far south, there's another group. Remember the Minians? I've talked about them several times. They're the northernmost of the Yemeni kingdoms. So the southernmost of the Yemeni kingdoms is Lithyan, and the southernmost of the northern kingdoms is Lithyan, and the northernmost of the southern kingdoms is Min, or the Minions, and they will have a great deal, both of them have a lot of influence on this area because it's the Hijaz, and the Hijaz is influenced by the people nearest them, right? So Yaguth was a name that appears in the northern inscriptions. Not 100% sure where the name comes from, but it's probably northern. This was originally a sun god. By the time he gets this name, he's definitely male, and there'll be a little bit more on him later. Nasser means vulture. Yes, it is not a fun name at all for me, guys. But fortunately, the one I have to talk the most about is Wad, which I'm very happy about. So Nasser means vulture. It's the name of the goddess Shams, which is another sun deity, and Himyar. Al-Kalbi doesn't know more, but Nasser is attested as an idol in inscriptions in Jewish and Christian sources. So she's basically known, like Jews and Christians will write, hey, and these people worship this vulture goddess, right? They'll write about it. So she was well known, even though her worship is probably extinct by this time, like she was famous enough that people remember her. Well, Wad is listed first, and he is our main focus because we keep finding him in Islamic sources. He is the one who is currently relevant to the people around Mecca. Of all these people in this, all these gods in this list, only Wad is currently relevant to them.
By current,
Al-Kalbi
what do you mean by
thinks
current?
he's from Duma. Current is in 7th century.
I figured that's probably what you meant, but I just wanted to clarify.
Right. So, yes. To clarify, we are currently sitting in the 6th and 7th century, in our minds here, right? So Al-Kalbi thinks he's from Duma. That's just typical Abbasid propaganda. He'll just claim everything that's in the Kaaba is somehow from the northeast. His Wad's name literally means love, which puts him in association with Venus. So that means that most likely Wad, you would expect Wad's consort to be like Miss Love, who would be Miss Al-Usa. We'll find out about that in a second. So Wad is actually not from Duma up north, but from the south. He's from Yemen. He is the leader of the pantheon of the Minians. Remember, the northernmost Yemenite kingdom. And he is a moon/snake god. He had a temple in Dedan, which was perhaps, it seems to be in the Minian colony there. And Dedan is part of Lithyan. I told you that Lithyan up here and Dedan down, or Lithyan up here and Min down here of the Minians. Those are the two important folks. So Wad exists all the way in this northernmost southern kingdom. He also had a temple north of Mecca. So he's definitely known in people going through the Hijaz because he's like right there, right? And yes, there does seem to be a weird delay between me and
okay, good to know. I hadn't observed anything. I mean, I'd only said a couple words, so it would have been really hard for me to know that there was a delay. But good to know. I'm not surprised, given all the other issues that are happening today, that there would also be some sort of other lag between us. And knowing that, we'll try to keep that in mind.
And yes, I am working on actually several books simultaneously, which is not very constructive to actually finishing anything, by the way. And part of the problem is that for my fiction book that I'm working on, every time I do more research, like I have to tweak things a bit more because I get a clearer idea of what things were like back, right? So now we have this god that we know was south of Mecca, but also north of Mecca. Well, guess what? The Minions were the first people to control the Hijaz. So the nobody for them had a kingdom that truly exercised like dominion over this area. There were tribes, and individual tribes could claim their own territories, right? But they were the first ones to exercise full control over that area, and they exercised control over that trade route at the time whenever it was at its height, whenever it was at its richest, before the Romans moved a lot of the international trade to the ocean and only local trade.
So actually now would probably be a good time to take the super chat before you get into the meat of it there. With fingers crossed from Daniel here. And of course not, which means it's going to trigger at a random time for us. But Daniel says, God bless you both, brother.
If you want your wealth to increase in this dunya, then give sadaqah more and more. Every single day, 2 angels come down. One of them is making dua for those who give. He says, Ya Allah, give those who give. If you want your wealth.
Thank you very much for that. There, Daniel. I'm not sure what was heard before it started, so God bless you both, Brother Thaddeus and Sister Mary.
Yeah, we heard everything, and just very so
a lot of it, I think.
That's okay.
Yeah, a lot of it is my internet. I've been having some problems recently. In conversation with the provider to try to figure out what's going on. They actually don't know why it's not working properly, and it will work properly for a while, and then it will just randomly start getting all funky again. And then I certainly am paying for plenty of bandwidth. I would like to actually receive the bandwidth I'm paying for. That would be nice, but you know, we'll do our best.
Yeah, that would be nice. All right, so the life of the pre-Islamic Arabs, especially in the Hijaz, depended on trade, and they made a trade of the religion as well. About 400 years before the birth of Muhammad, supposedly, this is all from a book, right? So I'm reading an Islamic book claiming that this is claiming all of this stuff. This is not me saying this, okay? One Amr ibn Lahyo, I don't know why they wrote it that way, but anyway, Luhai is how he's usually written, or Luhui, UI is how it's usually written. Anyway, Ibn Harith, Ibn Amr, Al-Qais bin, etc., etc., etc. But notice it goes Ibn Saba, okay? So they think that this guy's from the south, a descendant of Qatan and king of the Hijaz, put an idol called Hubal on the roof of the Kaaba. This is one of the chief deities of the Quraysh before Islam, etc., etc. And then they talk about the other idols that he believed, that this particular scholar believed was in the Kaaba. And he says, thus Wad was shaped like a man, etc., etc., and Suwa was a woman. So he thinks that these particular ones had particular idols here. So that's funny. If the people were already worshiping a vulture, comment, it would be quite easy for them to start worshiping Muhammad then. Indeed. Indeed. So, and this is what scholars said. I couldn't find anything ancient that explicitly said that Wad was definitely an idol that was there. I had descriptions of other ones. So, Freebird Sweetie, if you think that Hafiz Ghulam Sarwar of Pakistan is a liar, you can call him a liar.
These are the
that's okay.
These are the level of arguments or responses that Muslims are reduced to. They just need to come in and name call because they don't actually have anything substantive to say on the topic because, well, we're right. So they have no sources that contradict us.
Yep. So Al-Kalbi notes that the Arabs preserve nothing of its poetry except those poems immediately preceding Islam. So if they're talking about gods at this time, these are gods that they still recognize. So, and Ansari, who was one of Muhammad's companions, right? He says, "We forsook Alat and Al-Uzza and Wad. We stripped off their necklaces and earrings." And then another one that was recorded was, "May Wad keep thee and bless thee, for it is unlawful with women to daily and wanton, thus our faith hath dissolved." And the kind of funky lack of verbs you'll find pretty often in poetic Arabic. It's just how it is. You like fill in what the verbs would be. So one would know what one does with women to daily and wanton, right? Anyway, so he also noted, I then requested Malik ibn Haritha, saying, "It described me Wad in such a way that it would make it appear vividly before me." And he replied, "It was a statue of a huge man, as big as the largest of the human beings, covered with 2 rows, clothed in one and cloaked with the other, carrying a sword on his waist and a bow on his shoulder, and holding in one a spear to which was attached a standard, and in the other a quiver full of arrows." So, now let's, we have this Wad from this Yemeni pantheon, who is found in Mecca. Wad etymologically, love, again, was associated with the moon and serpents. We should expect a second female, Astarte or Venus, with him. Since he's a god of love, we expect Venus to be with him, and it turns out that indeed Al-Uzza was the most important goddess originally to the Minyans. So Wad was recorded as being one of the idols of the Kaaba by that particular author. Abd Wad is among the Theophoric names of the Meccans. It's the only clearly South Arabian deity name among all of them, among all the Theophoric names that we have in the record. It's also through the Minyans that the South Arabian writing system was used in Northwest Arabia. So the whole reason that you got the writing system from the Sabaeans that was carried to the north, it was because the Minyans had taken over and had used it up there that began to be used more. Okay. Now, I'd mentioned previously, whenever I had read these passages kind of in full, that you should pay attention to the snakes in the Kaaba, because they are connected to this Wad. So, for example, the Shekinah or Sakina in Arabic, right? That's the, and in Hebrew, it's the glory of the Lord. That's what it means. But Muhammad doesn't know what it means, so he makes up something, and it seems like to him the most appropriate thing for it to be is to be something that is a gale force wind with 2 heads, one head follow another till they reach Mecca, coiled up at the side of the house the way a snake coils. So the snake imagery is attached to the founding of the Kaaba by Abraham, because to Muhammad, whenever he thinks of the Kaaba and its origins, he thinks snake because of Wad. And we see again, so God sent a gale force wind, which had 2 wings and a head like that of a snake. It swept around the area of the Kaaba, clear for them to let them build with the foundations, the original house. So this is the remnants of an idea that a snake deity is helping this house be founded, because the original god of Mecca was in fact this snake deity Wad. Okay. And then here is a kind of a story that is a bit of it's a legendizing idea of the end of Wad being associated specifically with the Kaaba. Okay, so what had happened is there was big flood in 605, and everything was washed away. And then supposedly this happened when they went to rebuild it. They couldn't rebuild it first because a snake used to come out of the well in which sacred offerings were thrown, and that was in the center of the Kaaba itself, inside the walls. they would throw their offerings down to the well. So if you had like a or whatever, you throw it into this dry well. There's no water there. It's just something that pagans used to do, right? And so after the flood and it was open, a snake was able to get in it. So a snake now controlling where all the offerings have been thrown in for years and years and years. And a snake came out and sun itself on the broken wall of the Kaaba. It was an object of terror because whenever anyone came up, Quraysh said, now we may hope that Allah is pleased with what we propose to do. We have a friendly craftsman, we have got the wood, and Allah has rid us of the snake. So this is like a legendizing of this snake house being purged of the snake god, and now Allah is in charge and is inheriting this. It's absolutely ridiculous as a story, because if you had a snake, what would you do? You'd get a stick and you'd kill it.
Oh, you're fine. Okay. I'm definitely having some connection. Oh, this is a Mary drop. That's interesting. Didn't drop from my perspective. So, okay.
Yeah.
If we continue to have some issues, we might take a 5-minute break and try rebooting. So just let us know especially if you're having issues with the audio, let us know. So just like maybe rewind a minute or something.
All right. So now the second story here, the snake that used to come out of the well in the Kaaba. So this is a story, essentially, the Kaaba had gotten destroyed by a flood, and they had to rebuild it. And there was, 60 seconds. All right. So you can just turn off my video completely for now, because nobody needs to look at me. How about I turn it off? We'll just have me with audio. How about that? And then his computer will have a little bit less work to do.
Well, yeah.
So
internet anyway, because the computer's is fine, but my internet, yes.
Yeah. It's the internet will have just a little bit less to send that way. So the snake would come out. Right, you'd kill the snake. I think people heard that part. And so it was getting rid of the snake because the snake deity is now being inherited by Allah instead, right? Yeah, the birds taking snakes is normal, but this is really kind of this made up story, because if people were actually scared of a snake, they would kill the snake. They have spears, for heaven's sakes. You know, we think about them fighting with swords, but they really mostly did most of their fighting with spears. In fact, it was considered that you could be, quote, disarmed in Mecca if you had a sword only and not a spear, because their main fighting weapons were spears and not swords, right? So anybody would kill this. The story here, the point of it is that this was essentially founded by the snake deity, and now Allah is no longer the snake deity. He's getting rid of the snake deity, right? So who was the replacement for the snake deity? Well, it is Hubal, which means the Baal. Now, it has been the consensus of scholars that Hubal is Baal, or Baal, but they're like, how do you get phonetically from Baal to Hubal, especially the Baal part? So that sound in the middle, Baal, that's the Hamza. Okay, in Arabic, it's called the Hamza. It's called other things in other languages, but we're going to call it the Hamza, right? So he is thought to be Baal, or probably Ha-Baal that turned into Hubal because of a phonetic process called simulation. But they're like, how does that drop out in the middle, right? Well, that part's actually easy, because the old Hijazi dialect did not have a Hamza in the center of any word. So if the word is Baal, the people in that main part of the Hijaz, the people speaking Old Hijazi, they're going to say Baal, because they don't have the Hamza between two vowels in the middle of a word. It just goes away between two vowels that are the same, right? So by the time this word arrives in Yemen, it's just Baal. And we find that in Aswan, a particular city in Yemen that is a city-state and has its own high god, its high god is spelled BLW. W is added for nominatives is you, but it may stick around in consonantal form to turn BL into a proper. My autocorrect keeps getting my triliteral to trilateral. Sorry, guys. It's not three-sided. It's 3 letters. It's a 3-letter root, right? So you'll see that W appended to names similarly in Abatea in the same way. And I have a citation there for anybody who would be interested in it. Then as it's going back and forth, it probably picked up the Ha and Lithian or Dayton. This is my personal deduction because that's where it is most likely to happen in terms of where this Ha was used at that time. It's probably not Hubal. Originally, it probably was Hubal because who meaning he, it's probably Hua there. It's just less likely, so it probably was Baal. And it ends up being a fossilized Ha. It doesn't no longer mean that, it just kind of gets stuck to it. And this has happened several times. It's documented for a number of words that the got stuck to words and glued onto it accidentally because it appears as HBLW in Abatea. And this is attested in inscriptions. It could be another name for Baal Shemen, or it could have been a splinter access or aspect of Baal. So basically what happens is you can start with a god, and God can have multiple names, or every single name that the Baal has or that God has can turn out to be its own separate deity, and given enough time they kind of split off, just like they kind of combine with each other. So it never appears together with Baal Shemain, so we don't know for sure, but it could be another name or could be a different aspect of the same
Yeah,
thing. So
God, Mike
right?
M here said that
Then
there
it
are
traveled.
or there
Yep.
were different Baals, and that's correct. The term, if I remember correctly, means something like master, and thus is a term that is easily adopted to be a name used for a deity. And Phil said that I rhyme Baal with Baal, which is what a lot of people do. Mary is pronouncing it the correct way, even the correct Hebrew way. That's why it's often written with the apostrophe, is because there is an additional sound there. But, you know, as long as we know who you're talking about, it doesn't really matter that much. Most Christians do say Baal, so no big deal there.
Yeah. Hail Baal! You can kind of say the draw, right? So yeah, so that sound is an actual additional letter. So and you do have to account for it. So the major protest that Muslims had, who really don't want this to be Baal, is that you need to explain how that comes out, because we do have dialects in which the word is Bel and not Baal, but it's just not plausible for Bel to end up over there turning back into Baal for no reason. Like, it's just not phonologically plausible, or distance-wise, travel-wise plausible. It's just not plausible. So you have to account for that Hamza dropping out. And this is something that I've discovered that I don't think anybody else has talked about before. So if people go, well, Baal isn't Baal, now you know, actually in the Hijaz of the time it was, because of the way they pronounce things. This is documented. So yes, Muslims have certainly dropped the ball when it comes to sense. Very nice, very nice. So it is very, very, very likely that in fact this Baal does have the aspects of the Baal of the Hebrew Bible, right, that they're talking about, because that is primarily a weather god. And we find that Allah, his special domain is weather in the Quran and in the pagan writings of the time. So if you have, we have poetry that's been preserved, and people think that, scholars now think that they can determine, they can sift through and figure out what's generally intact from ancient times and what's been seriously mucked with or forged, right? And in the stuff that is considered to be generally intact, the authority of Allah, which is applied to this Hubal over the weather, is particularly pronounced. So yes, it probably really is Baal of the Bible. So we're back at Baal of the Bible. And it's also really interesting because there's a specific reference to there being ram's horns inside of the Kaaba when it came time to get rid of all the idols. One of the things they had to get rid of were ram's horns, even though they had a particular idol of Hubal. They also had ram's horns, which got picked up by Baal right before he got shipped off to Carthage and ended up on our old buddy Alexander the Great, right? So, now Baal is not a moon god, but Hubal and Mecca is in the ancient times before Islam. Why? Because moon is the attribute added to any high god in the South Arabian influence systems. So if you have a god in any kind of that is in any way attached to Yemen or influenced by it, they thought that it was appropriate to your high god for him to be a moon god. So just like Wad is the god of love and like serpents are his symbols, right? Yet he was a moon god because he was a high god of the Midians. Well, here we have Hubal coming in here. And so Baal is not inherently a moon god. Well, Wad wasn't either. He was a god of the moon by virtue of being the chief of the pantheon. So the same thing happens. Hubal becomes the god of the moon by virtue of being the chief of the pantheon. So in the Quran, he is mainly a divining god with special arrows. This is also in the Islamic sources, right? But this may have been inherited from Wad, as the idol of Wad in another masjid explicitly had a quiver of arrows. There are also references to divining in the context of a totally different, the like rival Kaaba that we'll talk about later. So this is probably this divining god got stuck along with these other aspects in this area being applied
So just real
to
quick
the high
from Andrew Martin here, he made
So
a good point. He says, if you read the Quran, you'll see that Muhammad seems to be devoted to rain and clouds, consistent with Hubal, his high god, before he becomes the god of, or I mean, the prophet of Allah, although God of Allah works too. I did mean to say prophet. So I think that is an interesting piece of evidence for sure.
yeah, and it's not just because they're in the desert. It is very heavily because of this this Hubal aspect, right? So we would expect to find the chief deity of the Kaaba uniquely responsible for weather in a way that is not found in ancient North Arabian desert inscriptions if he has the characteristics of Hubal, and he becomes associated with fertility through his rule over rain. So there are interesting traditions of women circumambulating the Kaaba naked. And I thought at first that this was just one of those, oh, pagans were weird. But I found it in too many different sources and too many different, like, independent reports of different things that I think, yeah, there were like these subgroups of women who circumambulated naked for specific reasons. They were in some sort of subcult of naked circling of the Kaaba. So the traditional story of Hubal's arrival involves the Amr ibn Luhay, who is the Khuza'ah. He was the tribe right in between the Jurham, who were supposed to be the original ones, and the Quraysh, who are Muhammad's people, the Khuza'ah, right? and they're the ones who get blamed for Hubal. So he supposedly went up to Syria, and while he was there and getting cured, he discovered these idols that he'd never known before, because everybody was a wonderful monotheist in the Hijaz until he came and brought these idols and stuff. So this is a traditional story. And it actually is pretty likely that Baal was introduced with the Khuza'ah because, first of all, the Khuza'ah are from, if you look at their tribal affiliation, they're northern, so it seems like they might want to bring in a northern oriented high god instead of the southern high god. And it also seems like this is kind of the last hurrah of old pagan idols. They're trying to get lots of people to come to this thing, even as interest in these idolatrous sites are dying out. So their strategy to promote Mecca seems to be to get all the idols in one place, to be the one-stop shop of idolatry. But I'm not entirely sure that this is not later propaganda.
Yeah. So real
Now,
quick,
it's also important
from
to
Mr.
understand
Mueller
who
here, he remembers your intro from a couple weeks ago, and wants to know if this is related. He says, fertility reign like the Hadith where Allah resurrects on Judgment Day with a flood of semen, question mark?
Yeah, that is always very helpful. That is always excellently helpful. So, speaking of, if everyone would like the stream, that would be appreciated. And also, remember that you can always visit Reason Answers and subscribe to the Patreon.
Yeah,
and
apparently I need some money for.
Because I
need some money for better internet, apparently.
For internet. I know. I don't know what's going on. Getting away with not giving you what you're paying for as it is. All right. So Theophoric names are names that have the name of a god inside of them, right? So these Theophoric names show that Hubal has to be Allah. Remember, Hubal is a high god. According to all the Islamic sources, he is the high god of Mecca and of the Quraysh, right? So you would expect to find his name among the Theophoric names, among the people who are devoted to various gods. Guess what you find? Well, first I want to make sure that it's Abd al-Muttalib is not a Theophoric name. Al-Muttalib means basically the one who makes searches for religious reasons, so it's just a title. So, and the Abd has to do with him being called a slave, right? And we find other ones that are just kind of vague. They're either about the Kaaba, you're servant of the Kaaba, you're the servant of the house, you're the servant of the king, you're the servant of the inheritor, you're the servant of the warner, or you're the servant of the powerful. Those are the sorts of things we have that are just general titles. You can't tell who that is, and they're not very common. None of these are very common, right? Well, the most common one we've got here is Abdullah, slave of Allah. We also have Al-Uzza, Manaf, Alat, just one of them. We have Shams, which is more common, and I'll explain why that is. But so we've got our three goddesses, and we've got Manaf, we've got Wad, we've got Hilal is a regular name, means the crescent moon. We've got Abd Kulal, owl, and I have no idea whether or not that is a god, but probably absolutely no references to a god that people called owls, but owls were frequently associated with some gods, so maybe it was some gods like symbol, right? And there's one Abd Rahman who was Abu Bakr's son, no one else, right? So this is really the picture that we have. Since there are no Abd Hubals, we can pretty confidently say that Abdallah or Abdullah is our Hubal. Allah is the name for Hubal because Allah is the name for the high god. So we also have something very funny. We have Hubal's SMD, another triliteral root. Literal, again, literal, not lateral. So Muhammad made up stupid stories when he didn't understand the etymology of something. So Rahman becomes Rahm, and he cuts off the AN because he thought it was like the definite article from South Arabian. He was confused by this. So he decided that it was the same word as means womb. And so we have these weird stories of the primordial womb grasping Allah's hips and things because he didn't know what it meant. Well, Al-Samad is probably one of these stories. Al-Samad means solid, and there's a silly story to match. And we have the fun story about Allah shaping Adam, and he's made out of clay, and Iblis is scared of him, flies through his nose and flies out of his butthole, and he goes, oh, everybody else, you don't need to be scared of this one because this one is hollow while our Lord is solid, like that. And so Allah doesn't have a butthole, and so his name is Al-Samad. Well, it may be that this story was one of these very silly stories that he made up to try to explain why his God was called Al-Samad. Because we find in Ugaritic writings that Baal has a club called SMD, right? And he's called Baal of the Samad, or Baal Samad, which is used as a pun in the Bible in conjunction with Baal sometimes. Baal. So sometimes there's like a play on words that's condemning or making fun of Baal, using the same that particular root with a totally different sense, but it's still like making fun of it, right? We also find the idol of Ad is called Samud in poetry as well. So in the pre-Islamic poetry, we have a confirmation that this Samud was this term that was circulating around too. So now we have kind of this extra confirmation that Hubal actually was who this high god was, and that his name was also Allah. So after Hubal was a popular name, Allah becomes the popular name for him. And so that's why I say Allah arrives, or has actually already been there all along. And we can, not sure what disease you're thinking about, Clay, but I have some instances. This is from Ibn Ishaq's story of the story of the childhood and before, and the digging of the Zemzem well of Abdul al-Muttalib, who was Muhammad's grandfather, and then the story of Muhammad's birth and how he was brought in front of the idol. And listen how they stand right in front of Hubal and they call him Oh Allah. So he's digging the Zemzem, right? And he vowed that if he should have 10 sons grow up to protect him, he would sacrifice one of them to Allah at the Kaaba. Afterwards, when he had 10 sons who could protect him, he gathered them together and told them about his vows and called on him to keep his faith with Allah. They agreed to obey him and asked what they were to do. He said to each of them, let's get an arrow, write his name on, bring it to him. This they did. And see, here's the divining arrows with our buddy Hubal again. They took him for Hubal in the middle of the Kaaba. The statue of Hubal stood by a well there. It was a well in which the gifts to the Kaaba were stored, right? And he said to the man with the arrows, cast the lots, etc., etc. So he's standing in front of Hubal. And so they're casting the lots. Nonsense. When the man took the arrows to cast lots with them, Abd al-Muttalib stood by Hubal praying to Allah. So he's praying to Allah, standing by Hubal. Now, is this a coincidence that he's here with Allah and he's praying to Hubal? Well, after his grandson was born, that's going to be the next page. Hang on. So here's another time where they're casting lots, and he's still standing by Hubal praying to Allah.
So quick comment from Andrew Martin, which is relevant here. He says the casting lots with arrows is the gambling in Quran translations. He's absolutely correct, as you said. And I had a brilliant rebuttal or something from Malhid here. He says, all you guys are jealous of the Hatin of Kaaba Sharif. And then
why would we be jealous of a block? It's embarrassing that you have this early Iron Age, like who, what civilization has its most holy place be so incredibly unassuming, right?
yeah, so then
Yeah, like
Morkay,
that. I
right?
don't know
Because
what that
his
is.
argument, right, is that we're doing this stream because we're jealous. And then Morkay says, I don't know what that is. And then he says, see, you guys don't know anything about Islam. Consequently, Islam wins. So notice the
Oh
logic here,
my
right?
gosh,
We're doing this stream because we're
that's
jealous of something
incredibly
that we're
stupid.
unaware of. And because we're unaware of that, that means Islam wins. But his argument was we're doing this in the first place because we're jealous. Great logic here by the Muslims. And of course, he hasn't said anything about the actual topic because he can't. Just like all Muslims have no answers for this because they don't know this material. They have no clue what we're talking about. And the smart ones will listen, discover the truth. The dumb ones, like Malhid, will just stick their head in the sand and call names. So your option. You can listen and you can learn something, and you can learn that you are actually worshiping the derivative of a pagan deity, or you cannot and just go about doing that. And I'm sure that Satan will not mind one bit.
Oh, someone says he thinks he's a joke account. He might be. It's so. Oh, yep, it's definitely a joke account.
Oh,
Sorry,
I can't tell the difference.
Sometimes whenever they, we can't tell the difference. Sorry.
Yeah, but saying that Zimzum water can make an aircraft unstable,
It's just
yeah,
a common
I
star.
think you're
Yes.
right. It is a joke. I thought he was being
Yeah.
serious.
Okay.
Like
It's
I
a
was,
joke account. We got taken in. We got
and
taken
that's so
in.
sad. That's so sad that we can't tell the difference.
Yes. It's sad that
All
we
right,
really
continue.
can't tell the difference. Yeah, I think that he's a bit of an ex-Muslim there. He didn't send us a penis, so he's not a real Muslim, right? Given what we've had be put through recently. All right, so now the previous one was about the whole Zimzum and how he doesn't actually have to sacrifice his son, right? So now we have the story of after Muhammad was born, he's being brought in front of Hubal, right? So this explains in general, if they want to circumcise a boy, make a marriage, or bury a body, or doubted someone's genealogy, they took him to Hubal with 100 dirhams and slaughtered a camel and gave them to the man who cast the lots. Then they brought near to the man whom they were concerned, saying, "Oh, our God, this is A, son of B, etc., etc." So here's the story. You come to Hubal to ask them this. Now, notice one of the things that you do to, if you doubt someone's genealogy, who his father is. Now, here's a very interesting story. After his birth, his mother sent to tell his grandfather she had given birth to a boy and asked him to come and look at him. When she told him what she had said, all of this miraculous stuff. But anyway, he takes the boy before Hubal in the middle of the Kaaba, where he stood praying to Allah, thanking him for this gift. So he's taking them in front of Hubal. Why is he taking him in front of Hubal? Why does he need to do that? So I'm just
Yeah. He apologized. He's like, I was just trying to make everyone laugh.
No, it's fine. You are making everyone laugh. You are, but it's just really, it's hard to tell the difference, even when you're this outrageous. You had to get to like aircraft carriers before we knew you were joking, because it really is that bad. But if you show up again, we will know you are joking. All right. So Hubal is Allah, and it also shows that, guess what? His grandfather probably doubted his parentage, or else he wouldn't need to bring him in front of the deity. So we have now we have these examples of standing in front of Hubal and saying, "Oh Allah." So we're calling Hubal Allah, right? But we also find Allah in inscriptions there. All pre-Islamic inscriptions with the name Allah are pagan, and most mention other gods. And these are inscriptions that are in the north. The ones in the Hijazi inscriptions are very rare, and the Hijazi inscriptions are like they're not religious at all. So you can't tell anything, the early Hijaz inscriptions. You can't tell anything about what they believe. People long for someone or wish for rain or whatever, but they don't say who they're asking for to help them be reunited with these folks. They're quite until Christian inscriptions arrive, you don't really see much of any inscriptions that have any kind of religious content, right? So, but Allah is mentioned in the north. And the form Allah seems to be created to parallel Alat, or Alat, which is by far the most important North American Bedouin deity. So the Islamic sources say, oh, Alat is made to parallel Allah. So, but the actual fact is that Allah was created to parallel Alat. So Alat was most likely created through the phonetic process written here. It was Hal-Ilat to Halat to Alat. The reason why certain writers were confused is that the later form of the feminine of Allah is Ilahat. It's Ilahat, an extra syllable. And so they're like, how do you get from Ilahat all the way to Alat? Well, it was before the stabilization of the ending, the feminine ending, which absolutely no one here cares about. But if you run across people going, we don't know whether or not Alat is from Al-Ilat or whether or not it's from La. Well, that's why they were confused. We are quite clear now as to what the source is because of something that Herodotus wrote. So thank you, or Herodotus, sorry. Herodotus is very useful for things like that. So now we know for sure that it's from this contraction. And so we would expect then that Allah is also from this contraction, okay? So Allah is originally Asherah, right, who was a mother goddess, and Astarte, who is Venus, smooshed together in northwest Arabia. It's really interesting because I have spent all my time previously reading trying to keep Asherah and Astarte apart because they're almost never combined. Well, guess what? They reach northwest Arabia and they get smooshed together. And Nabatea Al-Uzza becomes the alternative name of this syncretic goddess. So this combined goddess is now called Al-Uzza and arrives in Yemen through the trade route, right? Everywhere else they get distinguished. Al-Uzza becomes a title of Venus and it stays Venus, while Alat then gets broken off and becomes a mother goddess. So Allah first appears in the Safavid, that's Northwest Arabian, those early inscriptions, right? And he is a specific pagan god. We don't know if he has another name in these contexts because he isn't mentioned enough. But he isn't a generic god because we find him in a list, like, oh, help me Alat, and help me Al-Uzza, and help me Allah. Well, that's a specific god. That's not, hey, you random god, please help me, right?
Yeah, so John Scott said, so Allah is the name of the God, or a word that means God, like Ilah. So based on what Mary just said, it is a name of a god, a distinct god, right, before the time of Islam, yes?
Right. So it is being used, although it is kind of this, like Al-Uzza is a name meaning like the Most High, right? And Allah just means goddess. And Baal just means master, but these are referring to very specific deities. So Allah, in this time of like AD 400, right? Around this time refers to, or before AD 400 refers to this very specific deity. However, you can see how Allah becomes different from that over time. So here in this North Arabian ancient North Arabian epigraphy. There we go. Allah in ancient North Arabian epigraphy, we find that Allah is a neutral word, but it's used for a specific god. Similarly, Allah is used in a specific way in inscriptions, meaning one specific deity to those who are writing. The first inscriptions that we find it in at all are in Theophoric names, but we can't be clear who it is because he's not on enough lists. So if he were listed with all bunch of gods a whole bunch of times, like would know, well, he's not this god, because you wouldn't say and Al-Uzza and Allah if Allah is Al-Uzza, right? If they're in a list, they're not the same god, but he just is not important enough to be listed enough for us to figure out which god he actually is. So we know he's not Rudao. We know he's not Kal. That's not very helpful, right? Doesn't narrow down the list. So he's found in petitions to grant booty, to grant relief, to grant rain, to grant security, but none of these are exclusive domains of Allah. So he's also called the living. In these northern inscriptions, pretty much any god got called on for just about anything. So you can't tell what their aspects are from these inscriptions because they'd just ask for anything from most of the gods. There's a few exceptions that no one cares about, but for the most part, they just ask anything from anyone. So I told you before that I had discovered the name Allah in Ismainian inscription, and that Wad acquires the name Allah for the Minions. And the question is, well, it says over here that that is the god of Ma'in, right? So why isn't it that? Why are they wrong here? Well, note that, first of all, they're using a foreign word. This is an inscription from Yemen, and it's taking a word that is Arabic, not from the southern language, which is different. So they're borrowing a special word to apply to their god. So you wouldn't normally borrow like the generic word. You'd borrow a specific word or name or title or something, right? You wouldn't want the god. You have your own word for God. Why would you borrow someone else's, right? But the big thing is that there's also no definite article, and it's not in a genitive case phrase where it would drop out. So you would expect it to be the God. There is no the in here in any of the languages and any of the variants. It's just these bare letters, which really strongly suggest that this is Allah in context, because it is a specific God. So you'd expect to be a name or a definite article. And although the Shah is not written that doubling of the letter, double letters would be written if there's an intervening vowel, right? So the definite article could have been a bunch of different things, but it's not there. It's just not there. So this is gonna be Allah almost certainly. There are a few possibilities that could get you around that, but very, very, very strong likelihood that this is Allah. So thank you, John. I'm glad that you're enjoying the lesson. So we also have a special phrase called the daughters of Il. That is an I. Those I's, L's that get confusing look the same. So the daughters of Il, which is found in Yemen. So the daughters of Il are recorded in Yemen epigraphy, and they were originally mistaken for references to priestesses before their names were provided in other contexts. They just thought that, oh, we call the priestesses the daughters of the god, right? But the dual plural it's also sometimes hard to distinguish depending on the dialect script, but they seem to have originally been 2 goddesses and then later 3. Even some of the dialect scripts you can tell whether or not it's 2 or 3, some of them you can't. All right. And it is used with Wad. So we have the daughters of Wad being called the daughters of God, Il, in a generic sense, but also a specific sense because it's applying only to the high god, right? So Al-Uzza is attested in the Yemeni sources as Uzayan. And in Yemen and Palmyra are 2 potential sources for this title. Most likely a native name to Yemen. Al-Uzza is a female Venus. I've already mentioned this several times. So we have Alat. It's Latan in the south, and also called Atharat of Sinai, or Asherah, that's a goddess, mother goddess, next to Al-Uzza in Qataban in Yemen. So this makes a lot Asherah here and a conscious import. So she was specifically brought in to be like an extra goddess from the northwest, from northwest Arabia with this northwest Arabian name. And this is very early, like 500 BC. And this, even though Brill puts it 300 BC, more recent epigraphy and published papers said 500 BC. We also have Manat or Manot, who was a later addition, and so that now makes our more than two daughters of Eel. She was originally a minor goddess of the north, and she became important in Nabatea and arrives through Najran, which was Arab settled, down to the south. We also find that Shams is being used in a generic and in plural for important goddesses, although it's most probable in Mecca that Shams, the goddess, the sun, it means sun, so Shams, the sun, was almost certainly just the name for, the particular name for Alat and Mecca at that time. So this Daughters of God trope moved north, and it became the most, in the south, it became the most used of a selection of other titles and things like, there were lots of like these canned titles: Mother of the Gods, Sons of Haubas, Master of Aswan, etc. And Daughters of Eel became the most used. And the father of three daughters essentially won out over all the other competing configurations to the extent that the daughters essentially legitimize the father that you assign them to. In the same way that if you have a high god, he ought to be the god of the moon. Well, if you have a high god, he ought to be the god of the three daughters of God, right? So the local form with the appropriate name for the high god would then become the daughters of Allah, which you find Muhammad fighting against in the sources. You know, why are you saying that you have sons and Allah has daughters, etc., right? So the stock title, Daughters of God, with the god in question being applicable to the local high god, appears to have made a deep theological impression on the Quraysh. If the daughters of God could be the daughters of Al-Qa, Wad, then are these not the names for the same god? So is not every high god really kind of the same god? So the syncretic kind of impulse may have been influenced partly by the way Moon and Daughters of Allah and all of these things were being used there. So this provides a background for early Christians also rejecting the generic term God and picking Rahman for the father in Yemen, because Il had too much baggage. Because if you talked about Il, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's the one with the three daughters. And they're like, no, this is someone different. We're going to call him
So
Rahman.
now I think is a good time to put this statement.
Yes.
That's also becomes a question as I interacted with him. So Captain Christian, says, according to Christian Prince, Allah is not Arabic for God. Allah means La, and La is a name. So basically it's La, the pagan moon god. And then when I said that there is no record of a god named La, then he said that La apparently was stolen from the Aramaic Ilah, which means God, which is a contradiction to his first statement. But then the question here comes in from John Scott: isn't La a synonym for Sin, aka Yasin, the moon god?
No, I've covered this at the beginning. So if you guys go back to the beginning, it's the first thing that I covered. Saying that La is a moon god is just wrong. It's wrong. It comes from misreading an Egyptian word that is IAH. All of us Christians need to stop repeating this because it is totally wrong. And it makes you look like you don't know what you're talking about, if anybody has any kind of idea, right? So you can't interact with people if you're just like start out with something that's wildly wrong. Now, there was a belief, like I mentioned about Lot, that there was question about whether or not Lot was its own name or whether or not it really was Elat, because later on the feminine becomes Ilahat, and showed that it actually was just a compaction of Elat, and it seems extraordinarily unlikely that Allah could have possibly come from anything else except for Al-Ilah. And I did actually go, okay, native speakers, can you give me other examples of words that have had this kind of compaction? And they could give me several, I don't remember them now, but they could give me several examples. Yeah, I know of other words that do this sometimes or have done this in the past. So, yeah, CP is really, really, really good with knowing what the sources of the Arabic sources are right now in that talk about Islamic talk.
Yeah, and I just wanted to be fair
right?
here that
So that's what
Captain Christian saying they may have misunderstood him. He may not have been saying it was a name. So I don't want to attribute that to Christian Prince. I have no idea what he said. And I just wanted to be clear that it might have been a misunderstanding of what he was saying.
Yep. And there's also some people who say that, oh, Allah comes from Aramaic, but it actually seems to be the opposite, that after Allah was in use for a really long time, Aramaic speakers began picking up a form more like Allah as a neutral for God, just because it rubbed off. Because if everybody's saying that this just means God, this just means God for years and years and years and years. So if CP is reading out of an Arabic source, I have never found him to be wrong about what the overall message is saying. Like sometimes he reads it uncharitably, but I mean, come on, he's going to read it charitably, right? But that's where his expertise.
Yeah, and just like anyone else, so, right? Right, exactly.
I want you guys to check
that's
me
exactly
too,
what I was
because
going to say.
I may make mistakes, and so far, yeah, when I have found that I've made a mistake, it's so far my like big mistakes that I wouldn't want to like tell you guys have always been stuff that I'm still studying and still preparing for, and I haven't actually said it yet because I'm still, I get the wrong end of the stick. Because I was wondering myself, I'm like, well, is Allah really Al-Ilah? Is that true? Can it be demonstrated, or is this really still up in the air? Because I want to know. So I have spent, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 hours just on that question. And I am quite confident now that it does come from Al-Ilah, and it gets compacted and then applied to a specific god in a particular situation.
So,
right?
Just two quick comments. I encourage you to check everyone, whether it's me, Mary, any other Christian channel, Muslim channels. You got to check people out. Everyone makes mistakes. And, even discounting the possibility of, say, a Muslim intentionally lying, people make mistakes. I definitely encourage people to check things out for themselves.
Yep.
And the last point here from Captain Christian is what you were just saying. That is a good point. Regardless of how the word was derived, it certainly is used as a proper name now, right? Then there's a reason why Muslims all around the world say Allah, and it's not because they're saying, oh, the generic God. I'm using a generic term for God, right? They're using it as a personal name, and that's certainly what it means to Muslims now.
Right. Even if other people use it, they use it with a different target, essentially. So no, it does not. It is not derived from the Aramaic word. It is a smushed together, compacted, contracted form of Al-Ilah. And I'm quite confident of that now, but it was used for specific gods at the time. But let's look at the Theophoric names again, once again. So we have the stuff that I had before, and then we have Allah, whom we identified as Hubal. Now we have Al-Uzza, Manat, and Shams, who is Allah. And those are the 3 daughters of Allah. So now we have this kind of relationship there. We know who Wad is. He's this minion god. And then we have Yaguth, Manaf, and they're 2 important Arabian gods. And then we have Hilal, which is the crescent moon, but it just uses a regular name. And then kind of our 2 little outliers there. So most of this falls into a very small system. And it's kind of interesting that you will find that the Islamic sources keep insisting that there were 360 idols that were worshipped at the Kaaba at this time. And while they are quite firm in stating how many idols there were, I don't think that there are that many that there were that many actually being worshipped. Even 2 of the ones that they're very firm that this was there and this was, these 2 statues there. All of them describe these 2 particular statues of this man and this woman, etc. We don't find anyone named after them. So these are the only names. And I did a search for Abd, and all of Ibn Ishaq, right? And so I wanted to know, oh, Ibn Ishaq, what does it say? How many Theophoric names we have? Does anybody else know any other Theophoric names? And this is all I could come up with. So if anybody else can find up with more, let me know, all right? But it really does not seem that the actual people who had enough devotion that people would name their children after them were all that many gods at that time.
Yeah, that's
So,
not exactly consistent with the idea that
um,
the Kaaba was just filled with deity after deity after deity. I mean, I suppose it could technically be true, but clearly they weren't actually worshiping very many deities. And one other question uh, before we move on to a new point here. Don't want to sound stupid, but going to ask, like, never sound stupid by asking questions, at least. Well, I shouldn't say that. You could, in theory, but I don't think that you personally will.
oh
Yeah,
no,
exactly,
here
exactly.
this is a
Yeah,
good
that's what I was
question.
going to get to.
So when the Arab tribe, yeah, so when the Arab tribes converted to Christianity, would the word Allah have been already used as a generic term by them? Absolutely not. We do not have a single Christian inscription that uses the word Allah. Not one. They all use Al-Ilah, the God, separately. Every single one, without exception, period, paragraph, the end. We have no Christian inscriptions before Islam, whenever Islam did its brainwashing job. Oh, it just means God, everybody. It means God. It really means God. We don't find it anywhere being used by Christians. Now, what we do find, there is one particular poet who is considered to be a Christian poet who might have some sort of weird, first of all, his poems might be mucked with or they might be forged. Secondly, even if they're not, he's some sort of weird, heretical, mishy-mash, syncretic dude. And he, in his poems, would use Allah and also apparently went to the Kaaba. But he's all by himself in a sea of everybody else who disagrees, right? And so it was not used as a generic form, except maybe by this one weirdo. Now, we will find out that the pagans began to use Allah to refer to the Christian and Jewish God. So they were doing the syncretic mixing. And I have read, guys, in the past week, like 500 pages of scholarly stuff. And so just to prepare for this. So this is like massive amounts of stuff in here. So in about 430 AD, that's when I believe that Qusay took, this is a fairly standard date, not just me, but whenever Qusay took over and founded the Quraysh, right? Thank you, Adnan, that's very appreciated. So whenever Qusay took over the Kaaba area, he founded essentially Mecca as a settlement and the Quraysh tribe. He promoted this new Allah primacy, and I'm calling it Prometheism because I searched, could not find a term for it. So, what do I mean by Prometheism? What I mean is that you recognize one high God and you worship the one high God, and you also worship other gods as well and consider them to be helpers and intercessors and have lesser powers under the high God who created them and who controls them. Now, this, or who can like have control over them as God would have control over whoever, right? This is the system that Zoroastrianism has. Zoroastrianism has been dressing up in monotheism clothes to avoid being killed by Muslims nearly as much as they would have otherwise for a very long time. They're not monotheistic. They worship the lesser gods. Their names like mean worthy of worship, right? So this system is similar to the Zoroastrian one, and this is kind of what Qusay is inventing here. He's inventing something that he wants to be more palatable in a monotheistic world. So, because all the old pagan belief systems are crumbling, and tons of people are leaving the old paganism. He's trying to promote Mecca as a site that can withstand monotheistic rhetoric. Allah is going to be strong enough to stand against monotheism and like be persuasive enough to keep people to it. So this is, in this system, the Hubalness of Allah is de-emphasized. So we no longer want to call him Hubal whenever we're talking about him. We want to call him Allah, which feels like a more generic name. And the propaganda is that he's the sole creator, just like in Christianity and Judaism, and an Arab national god. So you should worship God, but worship him in this Arab way, as the Arab sure, right? So, Saya, you got to go back to the beginning of the stream. I've already dealt with La being a pagan moon god, did not exist, okay? So we'll talk about how he is a moon god next week. But this week is not moon god week. We're barely touching on the moon this week. So there's a lot of pagan poetry, and there are basically two academic camps. One say that everything's forged, or so nearly completely that there's no point in interacting with it. There's a clear consensus on the poems that appear in the Islamic material that they're all made up, right? Even early Islamic scholars criticize them for being fakes. But there's a second camp that's more popular now that, in general, although pagan poetry is highly contaminated, you have certain authors working in certain genres that conform to the criticisms of the Quran against the pagans, which should be reliable. So they haven't been Islamicized. And so if you remember my old simile of a rat poop, of trail mix full of rat, but you can sift out the rat poop and you can tell what the trail mix was, even though you don't want to eat it, you can tell basically what it was once you get the rat poop out. That's kind of what you can do with the poetry, and that is the consensus of most scholars now. So the question is, why would the Quran be reliable here in terms of what it's criticizing? I mean, obviously knows nothing of Christianity. Well, it's Muhammad arguing with his relatives. He's not ignorant of their beliefs, and he's trying to convince them. If you misrepresent people, you can't do a very good job of convincing them. And a lot of this material, by the way, comes from Rain Giver, Bone Breaker, Score Settler by Nikolai Sinai, right? So pre-Islamic poetry fills the 200-year gap between about AD 400, when everybody in the north stopped writing inscriptions, and 600 AD, whenever we have Islamic Islamic materials really showing up, right? So during this time, the pagan world's shrinking fast, but the pagan tribes aren't really living with Christians. They're mostly living near them. On a tribal level, they have like a marketplace familiarity with Christianity. So they'll come to the market, they'll meet Christians, and then they'll go away. There will be pagans living in Christian majority tribes and things like that, but for the most part, there aren't like lone Christians out in pagan tribes teaching them about things. It's just not happening at this time. And yet through this, these Christian phrases and even ideas percolate into the pagan milieu, and they shape it. So a similar phenomenon actually happened in the 1st to 3rd century Greco-Roman world, where you'll find the phrase the one God and the high God, and they were titles given by pagans to their main god in the face of the rhetorical force of Christianity. So this Prometheism is really something that we have seen happen before in the face of Christianity. Just the onslaught and rhetorical force of Christianity, how are you going to resist it? The only way is to have your own one God and high God and try to say that he is good enough, that he can like not, people can be not as persuaded to convert Christianity. So Allah seems to have filled this role in pagan society by the 550s. And that's based on poetry that is most likely to be authentic. Most of poetry is from like the 550s to the end of the century. So while all pre-Islamic Christian inscriptions call God Al-Ilah unambiguously, as I said before, they'll have a cross and then they'll talk about Al-Ilah, right? Pagan poetry is more ambiguous. They will call the Christian God Allah as well as Al-Ilah and use the terms interchangeably as the meter demands whenever they're talking about the Allah that is clearly pagan as well. So they are fundamentally syncretic. So they want to combine the Christian God and say that that's the same as their own pagan God. They're trying to shove the Christian God into their pagan God so that they don't have to change the worship that they're doing. So the pagan poetry indicates that the pagans will see that the Christians worship Allah, and they will begin to attribute Christian concepts of God to Allah. So the most striking is, that should be is not in, al-Nabiga, who's a poet from the pagan tribe who lived at the ports of the Lakhmids and Ghassanids, right? So he's at these northern courts where the Ghassanids have been Christian for a long time. The Lakhmids have just turned Christian, and there seems to be a lot of heresy running around where the Lakhmids are, near the Sassanid folks, right? So their Christianity is a bit more questionable, but in general, these folks are both Christian. So even though it's this guy, this poet, seems to remain a pagan himself. He invokes Wad. He goes on Hajj to Mecca, right? When the Lakhmids convert openly to Christianity, in his court poetry, he praised their God as Allah and Al-Ilah and Al-Ilah both. And he did the same at the court of the goddesses. That's the Roman foederati, their clients, right? And he bragged about their possessions, about scriptures. They're people who have a scripture. They have a firm deen. So this term deen appears in this early poetry as being a term meaning religion in this pre-Islamic poetry. So you have lots about deen in the Quran. Yet some of his pagan conceits were not welcome. He got explicit. He got to that should be two oaths. He got too explicit praising the Christian queen and languages that are normal in pagan poetry, not appreciated by the Romanized Christians, and he had to run away for a little while. So that's why he moved between the courts.
Just a quick comment here from Una.
So,
today's chat is pretty tame. That's because you've all learned that Mary is bringing all the facts, and you got to actually pay attention. So you're learning your lesson there. Quick super chat from Harriel Johnson. And we'll have to wait a second. But she gave a diamond emoji, and thank you very much for that. Apparently we'll be interrupted at some random moment here in a minute.
all right.
Who ate the apple? You ate the apple. The whole apple. Yes, the whole apple. You ate it. But a small seed, you left it. You put it back into the earth. What happened? Allah, through His power, caused that to grow and to give you how many apples? Thousands.
Thousands of apples for the pagan, for the pagan Allah.
Thousands.
Thank you very much.
All right. So there's this major religious shift in Mecca that's kind of part of this. And Mecca's main argument is our Allah is the pagan Allah. So Hubal is still Allah, but his Hubalness is now being downplayed. He's like, don't mess with Hubal. Let's talk about Allah, right? Main sacrifices to Allah, and the other gods just get their portions. The Quraysh of the 400s wanted to sell their buffet offering of gods, but those in the 500s wanted to sell their possession of having the legitimate high God. Like, we've got the God, the real God, and you need to come and visit us. And this propaganda was, by all accounts, quite successful for as many pagans as there were left, right? The further promotion of Allah and Mecca with the formation of a new a further promotion of Allah in Mecca was with the formation of a new cultic association, a new religious sect. They're called the Khams. And this happened between 558 and 575. So the switch allows Mecca to grow in importance as a pagan Hajj site as its legitimacy increases. Most other traditionally pagan sites have lost their tribal sponsorships as the tribes became Christian and were abandoned. A huge percentage of them were actually in the northern Hijaz. They're all gone now, right? So only a few of the supposed destruction of the idols events seem likely to have actually targeted functioning, uh, uh, rival mosques. So the other ones seem to have either been made up or they went and smashed stuff that were already in ruins and were abandoned, right? The influence increased even of Mecca and the Kaaba, and the religious influence increased even over the non-Hums pagan tribes. And at some point, an icon of Theotokos, that means Mary with baby Jesus, right, is deliberately added to the interior of the Kaaba. This is an act of syncretism. This is after 605 because all of this happened after the Kaaba was rebuilt. And it wasn't just that icon. I just recently read the passages that described what all was in there. There were pictures of trees. There were pictures of all the prophets. Like all the prophets that there were pictures of Abraham. There was the ram's horn. So there are these tons of these icons. Every icon that they could get their hands on, every Christian icon, they ran in and stuck it in their Kaaba on the plastered walls and on the posts and hung them up in there because they want to say, look, our Allah, yeah, he's got 3 daughters. He's also totally the same God the Christians are worshiping. We've got it all. This is the true God that all the
So
Arabs should
quick
come and worship,
rebuttal,
right?
I suppose, from Anti-Venom. He's been saying how it's too difficult for him to listen because it's all nonsense. And he said, I heard such foolishness several times, and ironically, it always happens to be by Islamophobes. Well, when you
Well, your own leaders aren't going to tell you the sources of Islam. They're not going to tell you what the pre-Islamic poetry says. So if you want to say that Islamic sources are stupid because you've been lied to, you can do that. Because we are the ones who are
I
going
mean,
to tell you the
just think
truth,
about this
dude.
for a second,
That's
right?
just the way it is.
Anything, right? He defines anyone who speaks against Islam as an Islamophobe, and then dismisses anything they have to say because they're an Islamophobe. So he expects that if Islam is false, that Islamic leaders will be telling him that Islam is false. Really great genius here. I can see why with such logic he doesn't want to exert any effort to pay attention whatsoever.
Yep, yep. So we want to look at what the concepts of shirk and monotheism are in the Quran. So there are 2 distinct phases of the Quran in terms of what kind of shirk, whatever is going on, right? In the early Meccan phase, Muhammad clearly says, I do not worship what you worship. And he also says, you do not worship what I worship. So my God is not your God. What I'm worshiping is not what you worship. Very important. That is a call to actual monotheism. Muhammad's God at this point is called Al-Rab and Al-Rahman and is not Allah. Okay? There is an entire chapter that's just Allah or Muhammad saying, I don't worship what you worship, and you don't worship what I worship, and I don't worship what you worship, and you don't worship what I worship, right? So this is his kind of pseudo-Christian phase where he's saying that, oh, I believe in the Masih, and I do not worship your Allah. You do not worship my Rab. Now, after some time, probably about 3 years, suddenly he's like, I worship Allah alone. And that's called to haha monotheism, right? Because Allah is now back to being Al-Rab and he's even Rahman. And he's totally the god of the pagan black stone and the pagan Kaaba at this point. Just stop worshiping all the extra gods and you'll be fine. And this is the Allahist phase. Some people are using Yahwist as a kind of term for the worship of Yahweh alone kind of thing, right? Or the development of Yahweh-centered worship. Well, this is Muhammad's Allahist phase, where he's saying that, oh, worship just this Allah and don't worship the rest, and you can stay worshiping the same
Would this
God just
perhaps
without this
be
association.
the
There
Tawheed
is an
Allah,
incredible.
where he's unifying all the attributes of the different gods together? Because that's what Tawheed means, unification.
No, this is definitely the God with at least 3 eyeballs and 2 right hands and a chin and everything else, because Muhammad never had any coherent view of Allah, and he left it to other people to try to make it
Okay,
make some kind of
just
sense,
checking, just checking.
and it didn't
We
work.
need to know which Allah Muhammad believes in.
This is the one who is, yeah, he definitely believes in a bodily Allah, without question. So you can contrast this with the post-Mosaic biblical narrative during times of idolatry. Anyone who is worshiping another god cannot be worshiping Yahweh. Read the Bible. They're mutually exclusive. Either you're worshiping Yahweh or you're worshiping other gods. You may think that you're still worshiping Yahweh still, but you are not, right? It is a pagan belief that you can worship Yahweh plus. That's why they said, oh, we have the Queen of Heaven. We're going to give Yahweh a wife because he needs one, right? And that is a possibility that you can associate is a pagan belief. The Quran agrees with the pagans on this, but just says association wrong. Okay? So there's a question, what do the associators believe that the Allahist doesn't? So the associators think Muhammad is a fraud. They think that he puts legends in the stories and the stories of the scriptures into his book and then just claims it's from Allah. Associators don't believe in angels, but only in jinn, hen, and even shaitans and other beings like that. They're used to jinn-possessed poets. That's something that they're accustomed to, right? These associators don't believe in the resurrection. The Quran says there's nothing but our life here below. We die and we live, and nothing destroys us except the course of time. That's a special word. Associators don't want to give up the junior gods. They would have specific roles for specific moments in life, as well as being general intercessors with the high God. The associators are concerned about the Hajj, the Kaaba, the Masjid al-Haram, all of which are pagan. So they're concerned with it in the old form. The Allahist wants to keep all of it, but he wants to de-paganize it. Essentially, he thinks that that's possible, that you can keep pagan things and just cut out the other gods, somehow still be okay. The associators reject the name Al-Rahman, and I'll have more information on that later. The associators do have carved images of God, and they're fine with that. Now, what do the associators believe that the Allahist also believes? They believe that Allah is the God of the Kaaba. Allah actively creates people individually in the womb, and this is all stuff that you can find in the Quran that they believe. And this is likely an extension of Hubal's paternity test. If Hubal can tell who's who, it's because he's helped create them in the womb. Allah provides security and food. He's the creator. He's the unique rainmaker, and that's the Baal connection. He's the one who gives recompense for deeds in this world. Everything and everyone will be destroyed eventually. The world is teeming with jinn and shaitans and evil eye, etc., that affect everyone. And by the way, everything will be destroyed eventually. That means like all people. They say that the mountains are permanent and the land is permanent, things like that. But like all cultures will, all towns will, all people will, right? Allat, Manat, and Al-Uzza are real beings, and they are benevolent. So Muhammad says that they're angels. The associators don't believe in angels as such, but Muhammad's saying, oh, these are angels. They're benevolent angels, and you shouldn't worship them because that's not their role. The black stone should be venerated, they both agree, and that regular animal sacrifices must continue. These are all things that the associators and the Allahist believes together and agrees about. So something that's important is this idea of the course of time in the afterlife. So pagan inscriptions and epigraphy stress the importance of the dhikr of the dead by humans. That means the remembering of them. So that there's a kind of shadowy afterlife of the spirit who needs remembrance, dhikr. The world does not involve a final judgment. There's no clear idea of an afterlife as such, like what it would be, right? Now, Christian inscriptions speak of the dhikr of al-ilah, and that becomes an expression of the hope of resurrection, that God will remember you, and you know, I won't be forgotten by God. God will resurrect, right? In late poetry, there's this underlying ancient belief that al-dahr, which is this inexorable course of time, takes everything away and destroys it. So in inscriptions, you'll find that the god or God, the fate god of the tribe. So your particular fate god is connected to this course of time. But in poetry, it's Mania, which is an individual fate or doom, and Manat comes from Mania as the goddess of fate. It's just got the feminine ending on it, right? So we find bid'ah, innovation, that occurs during this time. So in preserved poems, this old way of thinking is overlaid with a counter narrative that Allah can be a refuge against fate, or that he determines fate with his judgment. So this is an influence of Christian thinking seeping into the older pagan
So a
context
couple quick
and changing
comments
their beliefs.
from the Muslims here. Anti-Venom explained that the whole reason he was spamming what Allah means in the chat over and over again, apparently, is because even though we both call God, God, our understandings of him are different, just like we Muslims and you believe in Jesus as the Messiah, but have different understanding. So in other words, after all
Right.
that, he admitted that he actually had no point whatsoever, because even if it was the same word, we believe in something different. So he has nothing actually to say against us. And Freebird was gone a while, and then he came back and he said, when are the lies going to end? And I just thought I would clear this up for him. The lies will end when Islam is extinct, because that's where the lies are coming from.
Yep. Yep. So there are also new titles and borrowed monotheistic roles that we find in this pagan poetry that's different from the inscriptions. So in ancient North Arabian epigraphy, El Rab is always the god of the Jews, and it's a borrowed word from Aramaic. By the 6th century, this term is often used for Allah in the form my Lord, Rabbi, or even the Lord of something. Allah is Rab Mecca, so he's the god of Mecca, right? Allah requires the specific role of recompense, which is found in common with associators and the Allah's kings of Mecca. But for pagans, it's earthly only. Allah is the score settler in poetry, and he's also, and that's part of that concept, and he's called on to curse wrongdoers in the poetry. There's a concept of God-fearing that suddenly appears in the same phrase that's usually translated as fear God and things like that in the Quran. It's the same Arabic word. I translate it as guard, or actually I translate it as beware and wary and wear someone and things like that, because I wanted to distinguish it from like being afraid fear to this guarding kind of fear. But the concept of God-fearing or Allah guarding becomes important. So whenever we talk about God-fearing woman, that means that like it's a woman who watches herself with the conscience of as if God were watching her, right? And it's not an idea of terror or anything like that. It's a different concept, and that concept becomes imported into this pagan milieu, entirely pagan. Yet this comes in, right? And then the phrase or the praise of Allah is sworn by, and that's likely also a plundering from Christian sources, and it's bihamdillah. So it's not alhamdulillah, but bihamdillah. Bihamdillah. Goodness. And that be there is a swearing phrase, like the swearing by something. It's just an old way of doing it. It's not what you find in the Quran whenever Allah swears by something, but it is a swearing phrase of that sort, and that's a common form of it. So we also find a very few verses that may be authentic even lift the South Arabian name Al-Rahman and apply it to the pagan Allah. So that's why I said before, whenever people in the Quran very clearly do not like the word Al-Rahman being applied to Allah. And there is a hadith in which the Quraysh say, no, quit writing Bismillah Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, right? Don't write that. We don't know who Ar-Rahman is. We don't know who that is. Don't say it. So don't write it. Just write in the name of Allah instead. And so they don't like that, but apparently some of the poets have no problem saying that Allah is Al-Rahman, even if the people in Mecca do not like it. By Allah's permission appears to be a uniquely pagan turn of phrase. It's also found in the Quran. And it's connected to the borrowed from Christian sources, if Allah wills, which is already tested before Islam. A pagan writes of avoiding being attacked by the grace of the God in one particular verse. And Allah is equated with the creator in many different places, and that's a monotheistic influence. There are different levels of correspondence of Allah to monotheistic roles by different poets. So this would be expected during this period of change. All right. So
All right,
we are
let me
like
go ahead and take
near the end. Any
a
more?
super chat. I actually have a number of them. This one from John Wilson. He says, to help out with your internet, Thaddeus, tee hey, half for Mary too. And as you can see, we're still having issues. It hasn't played the video yet, so appreciate that. I definitely will be getting that resolved very soon, hopefully tomorrow, because, you know, I am paying for a proper internet, and it's just not working very well today. So I guess I'm trying to keep talking until the stupid video actually plays.
The next one comes up. All right. I guess I'll just start a little bit. Other distinct roles of pagan poetry.
Brothers and sisters, why to lose this great opportunity? Remember, when the person is on his deathbed, the last minute, he will ask Allah Jalla wa'ala to be delayed for 1 second to do what? Not to pray, not to do other things, but to give sadaqah. Because sadaqah, you can give it just like this, yeah, in 1 second.
You can give it just like this, but my internet actually won't go just like that. So it may take a little while for your donation to come through. I think that we found the key, though. As soon as Mary starts talking, that's when it starts to play.
It's just, yep. It's just because I'm super impatient. And like, come on, let's go. All right, so he's the exclusive rainmaker now, suggesting that Mecca has become successful in promoting their Allah is the real Allah. So the creator portion clearly comes from Christianity. The fact that he's so clearly exclusive rainmaker shows that Mecca's propaganda machine has actually worked pretty well. As a new dealer of fate, Allah is capricious. He's a bone breaker in poetry. He gathers and disperses what he wishes. And one should not feel safe from what Allah may cause to occur tomorrow. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? For Allah's command will always attain its object, bringing the wretched to wretchedness. For Allah does only what he wishes. He also schemes against people, but he can also still be the refuge against fate, showing a progression of belief. Allah is more knowledgeable than regular people, but not yet all-knowing. So one great poet named Zuhair says that Tuba, Luqman ibn Ad, Dhul Qarnayn, who is our buddy Alexander the Great. He already had the name Dhul Qarnayn, guys. Pharaoh and the Negus have all been destroyed by Allah. This destruction in the Quran only, well, that should have been an end of quote there. This destruction in the Quran only comes to pagans who reject Allah, but in this poetry, in this guy's poetry, it's the eventual fate of everyone. No matter who you are, Allah will come and sweep you away eventually, right? A number of pagan poets talk about the destruction of former peoples in these terms, using this particular word, alaka, which I probably just pronounced, in these terms as well. So, but the land, the mountains, the heavens, day and night, and our Lord are what are eternal. So everything else will be destroyed, but those things are considered eternal, which is different from the idea of the Christian end, where the land, the mountains, the heavens, the day and the night, well, gone. And we find that Muhammad adopts that view in his creation. So here are references to Allah in Mecca in the quite plausibly authentic pagan poetry, not 100% certain, but plausibly authentic. right? So Rab Makkah, meaning the Lord of Mecca, sorry, the house of Allah, the pilgrims of the house of Allah. Medina's guy in Medina says, praise to Allah, possessor of the edifice, right? Another one calls him Lord of the house. By the Lord of the, and then it's implied sacrificial animals that are dancing toward Mina. Remember, Mina is a place of sacrifice, even today. By the life of him whose Kaaba I have stroked, and by the blood that has been spilled on the unsabs, which means the beetles. And by the way, I'd been pronouncing beetle wrong last time because I got fooled by the etymology, which is Beit El, and I was calling it Beetles, thinking that would be like Beit house, El, God. No, it's beetle once it gets run through Greek and Latin and English, its pronunciation changes. So it's beetles, right? So it's the blood that's been spilled on the beetles. By him who grants security in the context of the writers heading from Mecca, by him whose sacred precincts, to whose sacred precincts, goodness, the Quraysh go on Hajj, and by that which Hira gathers together. Now it's really interesting because the Hira, the actual cave, was not part of the Hajj in Islamic times. So this is a pre-Islamic trait where Hira, the cave, is gathering people together, right? So the question is Allah in Mecca's Kaaba? So the Islamic sources do recognize a rival Kaaba in Thalaba. I strongly suspect that the deity worshipped there was also Hubal Allah as well. The Islamic sources carefully avoid the name and give a title instead. And so not every reference to the house of the Lord, even Allah, is necessarily about Mecca. So if it says Mina or Hira or Mecca, it's about Mecca. But if it's more generic, it might actually be about this rival Kaaba, who really appears to have sudden claim to Allah inside, right? So yes, it's spelled beetle, or it's pronounced beetle. I will write it in the chat. B-A-E-T-Y-L, or if you want to do the lazy and less common version, B-E-T-Y-L. So it means an upright standing stone that's worshipped. Yeah, and it would be, beetle would be nicer, right? Because it's less confusing, because beetle sounds like a bug. But, so who built it? I like the beetle. It worked better.
Yeah, we're about. We're changing the pronunciation.
Of the language.
That's how it works. So we get to say how you properly pronounce it, just like how David doesn't say Yamama because he knows people will laugh at that, even though that's the correct pronunciation.
Yep. So who built it and who was Allah? So we find a really interesting verse from Zuhair, our old buddy the poet. It says, the house around which circumambulation is performed by men of the Quraysh and Jurhum who built it. So that says the Jurhum were in fact the ones who first built it, and the Quraysh also built it because they rebuilt it in 605 after the flood. So much for Abraham, huh? Somehow he doesn't know that Abraham supposedly built this. He thinks that the Jurhum were first who built it, and the Quraysh were the people who rebuilt it. So Maywad, there's my lord showing it was tampered with by some people, but Maywad reserve you. It is not licit for us to divert ourselves with women, for religion or deen has become our resolve, exerting ourselves on sunken-eyed camels with fastened nose reins and hopeful striving for Al-Ilah, the God, and for piety and provisions. And that's from our buddy who was at the courts and then wrote two dirty poems about the queen and had to run away. That guy, that's who wrote that one. So something that I finally found out, found absolutely hilarious. So everybody knows that Allahu Akbar means Allah is bigger. Who's he bigger than? Guess who he's bigger than? He's bigger than Allah. That's who he's bigger than. She was called Allahu Kabir, which means Allahu the Great, and he is called Allahu Akbar, Allah the Greater. So he's bigger than Allah. So we find in the pre-Islamic sources explicitly by Allat and Al-Uzza and who serves them, and by Allah. Verily, Allah is greater than they. Allahu Akbar. He's bigger than them. So we finally have our answer. Who is Allah bigger than? I loved this so much when I found this. And I had already found Allahu Kabir, and I was like, oh my goodness. Allahu Akbar, Allah the Great, or Allah the Great, Allah the Greater. This has got to be it. And then I found this poetry line, and I'm like, yes, ka-ching, I'm dying. This is great. So we have differences between the Quranic associators that we see in the Quran, right? What they're being accused of in the poets. So the associators do not invoke fatal heroic struggle against fate. Dahar is invoked, but not as an element of a malignant Allah or mania. This might be more of an emphasis on a poetic conceit, for example, like Greek hubris. If you were just talking to Greek people, they wouldn't be talking about hubris and fate and all of this stuff all the time, so that may just be an emphasis thing. The associators do not see Allah as an agent of justice or recompense. But a number of poets seem more influenced by Christianity and do. Muhammad is against the associators for this very reason. The associators do not like the name Al-Rahman, as already mentioned. Some poets occasionally do steal this Jewish Christian title for God if it's authentic. And that is the end of this week's. Next week, we're going to be all about the moon and how the moon fits into Islam. I already showed you that the moon is proper to the high god of any Southern Arabian system. But we're going to talk about how the moon still influences Islam today.
Get some super chats here from Jack Ray. He says, points time, and I'm sure we'll get that in just a second here. Maybe. Yeah. So I'm going to bring up some other comments. So Andrew said, being a false prophet means you never have to loan anything to Al-Haha, which is a perfect comment for taking super chats, which it's going to do here eventually, and it's also going to get rid of the screen share. Yeah, Mary made noise. Come on, computer.
I giggled so hard whenever I first saw the verse where the pagan is saying, what, are we rich and Allah is poor? Because it came right after the verse where he says, give a loan to Allah, right? Give Allah a goodly loan. And then we have a couple more verses, and then it's like, and do you say, are we rich while Allah is poor? I'm like, it's because you just asked for a loan. It's the greatest. Like, all these people who are saying that Muhammad never existed, come on, guys. Come on. Could this ever happen in any other context? Oh, guess what else I found today? I found and I have no idea why this hasn't gone off yet to interrupt me, but I found in James of Des's Chronicle, where he mentions Muhammad the year before Muhammad is supposed to become the king.
Early, and this is indeed a sign, yet most of them are not believers. Give alone to Allah, give alone to Allah. Ride the wings of Gabriel, give alone to Allah.
Oh, perfect.
Hey, look at that. We even got the right one for this comment about being a false prophet means you never have to loan anything to Al-Haha. So you were saying, Mary?
So I found out that there was an eclipse recorded the year before the Hijra in Syria. Like, it was big enough that he wrote it down. So that is whenever Muhammad thought the moon was split. It wasn't a lunar eclipse at all. It was a solar eclipse. And it was, major enough to do that. So he thought the world was ending. It was the correct year for that to have happened. So I was like, oh, cool, nice. So, yeah, he thought the world was ending because there was a solar eclipse and that the moon had gotten split. He thought that they had run into each he thought they had run into each other. That's what he thought happened, because he said that always they are in their own courses and one never catches up to the other. because he'd never seen a full eclipse. It doesn't happen very often. He probably didn't recognize a lunar eclipse for what it is. So he sees the eclipse and he panics. Anyway,
and along the
very
same
funny to
lines
me.
here, Morkay said, funny, Muhammad said, loan to Allah and Allah would give back, but he loaned his armor to a Jew because Allah didn't pay him back, right? In case people don't understand the reference there, one of the things that he
Yep.
supposedly did as he realized he was on his deathbed was take out a loan with a Jew so that his family would be able to eat. He didn't have any money, I guess, and needed that they would have food. Amazing stuff here. What do you think, Mary? Do you think we should try to take callers or not, given the internet situation?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we can take callers. We just can only do voice, so no video. Look, I put on makeup for nothing, so you guys can. I bet I'm gonna be all blurry again. Oh look, I don't even appear at all. Yeah, I'm super blurry. So.
All right. So we'll try to take calls. Just be aware that with the internet issues, it may or may not go well. And we'll definitely want to try to restrict it to on-topic chat, given the difficulties here. But to give people a chance to do that, let's take another super chat and wait a while for it to show up. From Colton and Connor gave a super sticker, so thank you very much.
Here's the sad news. We are running out of funds. All our work is going to stop unless people like you watching this video will help us. Your donations can get you a share in a reward and reap those rewards for years to come, inshallah. This is not a donation or a charity, but an investment for your hereafter.
So thank you very much for that. And to Anti-Venom, you've said the same thing like 20 times. Stop spamming or you're going to be put in timeout. We got it. You think that Allah and the Christian Allah and the Muslim Allah are both the same, but actually different. And you just keep going around in a circle trying to explain why you're saying that, oh, it's the same word, but it's different, even though it's not actually the same word to begin with. We got it. Stop saying the same
Come up
thing
and
over and
talk to
over again.
us. Okay. So was Yahweh ever the storm god Hubal worshipped by circling around and groping a rock?
Yep. I have a feeling he
So,
won't hear what I
come talk to
said,
us.
but either way, the next time he spams one of these comments, I'm going to put him in time out. We have a new Muslim in the chat. This wasn't their very first comment, but they didn't say anything of any substance. So I'll just take this one. They insult their own religion because they are ignorant and listen to whatever the church tells them. That's amazing. Business. How did you determine that? Is that how you assumed that Christians behave because that's how you as a Muslim behave, that you just listen to whatever your mosque tells you? Because that's not how it works in Christianity.
Yeah.
So business, same thing to you. Say something on topic or get lost. Because I'm not really interested in
So
your random nonsense.
business, the reason why some Christians use the same name is because they got accustomed to it in Islamic societies and they didn't know where it came from. Whenever Muslims are like, oh, it just means God, it just means God for hundreds of years, they believe them. If you weren't born back when this word developed and back when it had specific meanings, how would you know that it's not used as a neutral word in the same way that we use God in English as a neutral word? That's not the way it was originally used. That in fact, if you go back to the 400s and the 500s and even the 600s, you will find that only the pagans called their God Allah. But they would also call the Jewish and the Christian God that, but the Jewish and the Christians would not call their God Allah. Just not the way it worked. Now, over time, people became accustomed to it and would use it as a neutral term, not knowing what its origin was, or really it had undergone a semantic shift because even Muslims were fooled into thinking that it was some sort of neutral term. But you can't say Bismillah, right? Bismillah, and that mean anything if that's not his name and the name of Allah,
amazing irony here from Business
right?
continues. He says, why don't you believe Joseph Smith too? We reject Joseph Smith for the same reason
Yeah,
we
why don't you?
reject Muhammad, because Jesus is the completion of the religion of Yahweh, the true God of the universe. You, however, don't have a legitimate reason to reject Joseph Smith because he made the exact same claims as Muhammad did. So if you accept the claims from Muhammad, then you don't actually have a
Yes, he
reason to
did.
reject Joseph Smith. Interesting.
Yep. So Joseph Smith taught against what Christ taught, right? And Muhammad taught against what Christ taught. So if you're going to say that Muhammad could be a legitimate prophet because he had a big ugly mole on his back, why on earth would Joseph Smith's claims not be any more legitimate than a huge purple ugly mole?
Mm-hmm. And then his grand response was free speech, which I don't know what that's supposed to mean, and I doubt he does either.
Yeah,
Let's
I have
take
no
another
idea.
super chat from Colton Connor.
If you frequently say it, Allah would pay off your debts. So you can refer to it back again, inshallah.
Look at that. One that played exactly when I called it up. Super sticker. The only reason I'm reading it is because we have to figure out what we're supposed to say over and over again to get our debts paid off by Allah. And apparently it's sneak peek with an eyeball. So there you go. Important information there. Comment here from Christopher. I'm filled with despair when I see anyone try to defend the cult of Islam. I grapple with losing faith in the human condition whenever I'm confronted with anything Islamic. Islam is evil. It's a very serious comment there. I will say that before I started to study Islam, I of course thought it was false, just like I know all religions apart from Christianity are false. However, having studied it, I've come to realize just how evil it is, that there's a distinct difference between being generically false and Islam. And I hear what you are saying. At the same time, I would say that since Islam is so abundantly false that no person who is not already believing it would find the arguments they make remotely credible. I think it also provides concrete, foolproof evidence, if you will, of the fact that this isn't really about facts. It's not about logic. It's about a spiritual battle between forces of good and evil, with, of course, Islam being the forces of evil. Anything you want to add, Mary?
So I have no free birds, sweetheart. Bismillah. Bismillah means in the name of Allah. I'm not talking about a spelling. I'm talking about the meaning. If you're saying in the name of Allah and Allah is not a name, what's the name? What's the name that you're in the name of? Right? Got it? Does this make any sense to you? It makes no sense at all. And the name of God, and then you never say God's name. Ever. Never give it. So, business. If you want to talk to us, you got to get your backside up here. Otherwise, you're going to sit in timeout for the rest of this.
Indeed.
Very
But
cowardly.
with Bismillah, I did
anyway,
have a comment from the audience that I think this bears repeating one more time. Oh, sorry, it was actually Alhamdulillah, but same idea, right? That somehow the phrase is referring to the God law, which we've covered a couple times, but I think it bears repeating one last time.
All right. Once again, so Allah is a contraction of al-ilah, and together it becomes Allah. It is treated kind of like the al is still kind of separate whenever it's combined with things, right? In the Quran, the way you pronounce it and stuff. But there is no pagan moon god La. It comes from al-ilah. The stuff about this pagan moon god La comes from an Egyptian god whose name is Iya, I-A-H. I, capital I. Okay? No, alhamdulillah, a pagan god. No, it's al-ilah that gets squished together. Yes, Allah is used in a pagan sense. It was invented by pagans. It was used for specific pagan gods for a very long time, and then it's used for Islam, which is a pagan rock religion, in emperor's clothing, right? It's dressed up to be in monotheistic clothes, but it's still the old pagan rock god, rock worshipping faith. But it is not, the word does not refer to any moon god. There was never any moon god called La. There was never any god called La. It's al-ilah. Okay? Now, anti-venom, come up. Quit saying stupid things. Do me a favor, quit saying stupid things, because Jesus did in fact cite, read aloud in the temple, a verse in which, a passage in which he himself was saying that he was coming to set the captives free. And in that same context, the definition of the good news is behold your God, and that your God is coming into the temple.
So I went ahead.
And that this is the Lord. So he is saying that Yahweh comes into the temple, behold him, look at him, and Jesus reads it and says, this is about me. So if you knew your religion, you would know that.
So I went ahead and put him on timeout since he just kept saying silly off-topic stuff. One more super chat from Colton Connor.
Brothers and sisters, why to lose this great opportunity? Remember, when the person is on his deathbed, the last minute, he will ask Allah Jalla wa'ala to be delayed for 1 second to do what? Not to pray, not to do other things, but to give sadaqah. Because sadaqah, you can give it just like this, yeah, in 1 second.
Why to lose this great opportunity?
Okay, and something else. Someone's saying Yasin is a moon god. No, Yasin is not a moon god. Those are 2 letters. Sin, like if you're not the literal letter, not the letter sin, but like the word sin is a name of a moon god used in Semitic, but that was not a name that was in use at that time. Nobody had been sin for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that also does not connect.
If you want to make an actual argument about Allah being connected to moon gods, you got to tune in next week. But stop repeating the stuff that was. I don't want to say invented, but popularized by chick tracks. It's not solid material, people. Allah sends all to hell. No, from Sam and Pat, and that is true according to both the Quran and reality. Anyone who follows Allah goes to hell. Just so you know. A couple more comments from the audience here. More K. They used to worship Al-Uzza. Now they worship Al-Uzi. I thought that was a good one.
Nice.
Oops, sorry. We answered that earlier. John House said, can you do a stream on proper Christian etiquette when talking to Muslims on the street about the gospel? And I said in the chat, coincidentally, I just proposed a stream to someone on that topic yesterday, and they said, I don't believe in coincidences. I only believe in Jesus. So however you want to view that, I don't have a date yet. It hasn't been set, but I actually am working on getting that set up. So that should be very good.
Yeah, so whenever sin, like in the funny letters at the beginning. So the silly letters at the beginning of the Quran are there, the various surahs are there because the Jews went, hey, you don't even know the name of our God. Produce the letters that are his name. He's like, well, God has 99 names, and started shoving in random letters, and he chose ones that looked the most like Hebrew letters, basically. And so they're all attempts to produce the Tetragrammaton and failed, miserable failures at doing it. So when sin is in there, that's just a letter. It doesn't mean anything. The word sin was a god, but had not been a god for a long time. There is no god with the name sin at that time and hadn't been for a long time. They're called other things at this time. Okay. They're just called other things. That doesn't mean that they don't have the qualities of a moon god. That doesn't mean that moonness isn't part of it. Doesn't mean that the crescent has not been a symbol of Islam for a very long time for very good reasons. So it's just not, they wouldn't go, if you went, hey guys, sin, do you know who sin is? They'd probably say no at that point, right? They just don't know the name.
I guess we're not quite done with this yet. Why are there crescent moons above many mosques? Uncle Sam at Speaker's Corner argues that's because of Hubal. He was also law. He does say moon god. Sorry, just trying to clarify. People say it, but
okay,
they are wrong.
Yep. Yes. It's not true. So, La is not a god. There is no god named La. No god named La. There was a god named Sin. Okay? No god named La. Never was a god named La. Did not exist. Okay? So, the high gods were always given the quality of being the moon god, just like they were always being given the quality of being the god who has 3 daughters. So the 3 daughters of him were always that high god, whoever your high god is. So every high god was a moon god. So you didn't need the god Sin, right? You didn't need a guy named Sin. You did not need a guy named Moon, because if you were talking about your high god, he was always the god of the moon, because every high god was the god of the moon. That's why Alat became the sun goddess, and the Abshams tribe in Mecca are called that because why? Because she is the goddess who's the highest in that system, and so she gets the title Shams, just like Hubal has the quality of being God, but doesn't even need the name, because he's just described as being, that's just part of his high godness, is being of the moon. That's just the way they thought. Now the crescent moons on mosques, I will absolutely cover in full detail next week. I have like 40 slides on the crescent moon and how it relates to Islam and how it relates to the Hajj, and why it became to begin the Hajj. What you were supposed to do is you were supposed to be seeking out the moon with your eyes until you went from the totally dark new moon to the first sliver of crescent, and that was the mark of the Hajj. And so that was a time when you would begin shouting these invocations and everything else. So this crescent moon seeking is like critical to the Hajj. Why? Because the Hajj was attached to the high moon god previously, and that tradition continued even as they forgot. This moon godness just became forgotten, and yet all of this moonness stuck around because it's attached to the Hajj. So I'm going to talk about this in lots of detail next time, like enormous amounts of detail next time. So yes, everyone keeps saying law. There is no God law. It is a misunderstanding of IAH written with a sans serif I, so it looks like an L, as if it were lowercase. I don't know why it would be lowercase, but it looks like an L, and then people got really confused. So no law. Don't use law. Don't ever say law again.
So,
okay?
Bo Rudder, I know this is a joke, but I wanted to bring it up anyway. He says, Sin has a name, Muhammad. And of course, the god Sin, right, has nothing to do with the English word sin. I'm sure people probably know that, but just in case. Good joke. Good joke. I do have a couple other comments I wanted to read here for some Jesus Bot. You should get a soundboard like David and AP. Well, first of all, I have not seen
We have
David
one.
use a soundboard. Perhaps AP does. I don't usually watch it.
AP has it and annoys David with it. It's
But
awesome when it happens. He has hijab doing the like screaming at people. Like one of his, you're finished. You're
but
finished,
in any
boy. You're
case, I mean, what do you
finished.
think it
Like
is
one of
when I do something like that?
And we're proud of that.
Yeah, I'm choosing to play the video too, but it's the same principle. I don't have to play the video. I could play just the sound.
Yep.
So, I mean, that is what I'm doing. Legitimate question here from Sam and Pat. Why wasn't the high god the sun? And
that goes all the way back to Mesopotamia. So if you go to Sumer, you find out that their high god, like so Deus Pater Deus or Deus Pater is the shining father god of the day sun in Indo-European, or of the day sky. He's actually a sky god, not really a sun god, but he's day bright sky god. And so we just think, because we read all of our stuff that's associated with that, and even in Egyptian mythology, like the sun god's most important, right? So we go, oh, Egyptian, oh, Zeus he's Zeus lightning bolts and stuff, but still he's like sky and stuff, and you think day sun would be more important. But if you go back to Sumer, you find out that the one of the early high gods is like this freshwater god, and then after that he very soon gets replaced by the moon god and the moon god's daughter, who is our old friend Inanna, who is Astarte, who is the Venus figure, right? And so she's a love war goddess that you get everywhere and gets imported as Aphrodite, and is now Al-Uzza too, right? So because she is very important, her father / consort / whatever, who's the moon, is also increased in importance too. So you'll find in all the Semitic countries, and Sumer wasn't Semitic, but Sumer's gods influenced Eastern Semitic systems. But you'll find in even the Western Semitic systems that this moon god and the moonness is much more important than the sun. And the moon god, moon is usually male and the sun is usually female as well, just in the gender systems of the language. So
maybe
David has sons as the last stream. He did that.
I don't think I watched his
missed
most recent stream. That was only a day or two ago, so I don't think I've seen that one yet. It's possible.
Yeah,
if so, you just know that he's copying me, because he definitely saw it on my stream before AP got a soundboard. I don't think AP probably watched my streams, but David definitely saw it because he is here, right? So he definitely saw it from me. He's copying me. That's what I'm going with anyway.
Yeah. Maybe he wants to annoy AP equally with how he was annoyed. So yeah, desert people also don't like the sun. Well, the moon gives coolness, blessedness, and just the feeling that rain might come more with night kind of things, all of that stuff, relief, whereas the sun you might not like as much. So there were some folks who argued that the southern gods weren't necessarily moon gods, that they may have been sun gods because they're compared to Dionysus by a Greek writer. This is a misunderstanding of who Dionysus was. For the Greeks, Dionysus had underworldly connections, actually, originally. He just kind of got confused when the Romans messed with him, because he had this ecstatic drinking kind of, he got equated to a particular, so there was a particular Roman god who, hang on one second.
While you're looking at it, I just want to point out the amazing irony here, right? So business asked why he was.
Oh, I got it.
He said that his chat isn't off. He actually said my topic is not off chat instead of my chat is not off topic, which is why I struggled with reading that. But anyway, he's trying to say that he's not off topic, and thus complaining that I had timed him out. And then he said, I said, you were timed out for insulting people, which he spammed about 10 insults, by the way. And then he says, when did I
Yes.
name call? Liar, liar. He
My
calls
name's
me
a
a name
liar.
when asking when I name called. This guy,
Okay,
this
he's gonna
guy
sit in
is such
timeout
an
for this. That's
amazing
ridiculous. All
genius,
right.
is he not?
Yes, he is. So Dionysus had this was originally a high god of a particular area in Greece who later got incorporated. And Dio, that beginning of Dio, actually is related etymologically to Zeus as well, and is that high day god etymologically thing again. So he was originally a high god. He got demoted in the system, but he has these kind of underworldly type and also prophetic mystical kind of connections. And there's a Liber Pater who was, Pater is in father, right? Not Potter making things. So the father freedom or freedom of freeness or father of freeness or whatever in Rome got equated to this static kind of prophecy or mystical experience of Dionysus together with the drinking of Bacchus. And so those two got confused with one another. Bacchus obviously is a day associated god. And so they're like, well, they're calling this southern Yemen god Dionysus, so clearly they mean daytime. No, Dionysus is not a day god properly. It's only when the Romans confuse Dionysus and Bacchus and squish them together and say that they together are kind of the same god and they're associated with this Liber Pater dude or Libre Pater dude that this becomes a day god. No, Dionysus is an underworldly / night / cave type god. So there absolutely is no contradiction in their high god being a moon god and also associated with Dionysus. So just wanted to clarify that in case you run into that, because I got misled by that for a while. Might still be on my website, which I haven't updated in years. So if do not take what is on, I was using it to organize thoughts, not actually to really put things out there. So don't believe that if you see that there, because I got misled by the
And Sarah
so-called
says she wanted to say I
experts.
didn't know about law. I heard that misinformation too. Very common. But that's right, right. That's
That's why
why
I put it at the
that's
front
why
of my
we keep
stream.
bringing it up, is because we really want this to be Christians to stop using this argument. You're not doing yourselves any favor when you repeat false information, no matter how damaging it sounds. If the Muslim finds out that it's false information, then they're just going to discard everything else you have to say as well. I had a super chat.
If if I say anything untrue, it's because I've made a
Yeah,
mistake, not
and
because of
to
my
be clear, I
truth.
don't think that people
So
generally are intentionally saying something false. They just
right,
haven't
right.
researched it, because I actually attempted to prove this some time ago when I heard it, and well, I didn't
And you
say
went,
it, but
oops.
I heard it, and I was like searching for
Yeah.
the God Va over and over again on the internet, all kinds of different derivations in books and whatnot, and I could not find no mention of this God because, well, he doesn't exist.
Ha! Did you ever figure out that it was Ea, this Egyptian god? I actually ran
Yeah,
into it somewhere. I'm
so
like, wait a second. Wait a second. What? Wait, that sounds familiar. And I actually like dredged it out from the depths of my brain, like that there's wait a second. What are the moon gods of Egypt? So
so
like
yeah, so
I
anti-venom, I
actually
don't
figured it out.
care if you think I'm being fair or not. You started the off-topic chat. Other people were not mature enough to ignore you, but you started it, and you have the opportunity to call in, right? You have the opportunity to call in and correct us on any of the claims. You also have the opportunity to be on chat after I told you 3 times that if you needed to be on chat to drop the off-topic chat. And the 3rd time I said it, I said, if you do it again, you will be put in timeout. And then I put you in timeout, and you couldn't understand why, because you were not paying the slightest bit of attention to anything. So You have been treated fairly. I don't care what you think otherwise. We'll be wrapping up here in a
And it,
second since we have
yeah,
like 3 or
and
4
I
Muslims.
just wanted to,
Yeah, we have 3 or 4 Muslims in
yeah,
the chat who are complaining about various things. None of them have the guts to actually talk
and
to
they
us.
won't come up.
Like,
You know that we'll talk about just about any topic with you guys if you actually come up, but you guys are terrified that we'll ask you about anything about this. So, oh, one other thing. So, um, Al-Makkah or Al-Makkah, I have no idea how it was pronounced because we just don't know, of Sheba or Saba, right? That god is the high god of Saba, but is not Wad, even though they both get assigned moon status because they're both high gods. They're both the moon god, right? And you can tell this very clearly on coins if they're assigned the status because the coins will always have this crescent moon for that god and then the Venus star for the goddess, right? So even though they are both high gods, they're both moon gods, it is only Wad who is found in the Hijaz. So Al-Makkah has nothing to do with Mecca. It's the wrong letters too. And Saba never controlled the Hijaz. That was the minions, the guys that you barely ever hear about. Like I've read, I don't know how much I read about the history of Yemen, before I even ran into this Ma'in group. I'm like, what are these people? What do they do? Wait, they have this huge empire? And it's funny because even that map I showed you was like pretty messed up. It wasn't right. It didn't go down nearly far enough south. It was wonky because they're so poorly researched. But it is, you will find the word Wad from Yemen in Mecca in the Theophoric names. They understand him as a primordial deity. The aspects of snakeness are all over the sources as being the way this was before the arrival, before the triumph of Allah, essentially, is baked into this. So you want to be looking at Wad, you don't want to be looking anywhere else. And be very careful if you think that words sound the same. Make very sure that they're the same words, because I pointed out before that even if things look the same spelling in English, they might be completely different letters that are not compatible with one another. You really have to be careful, guys, especially if you're doing anything phonetic related. Right?
all right. So I did have one last super chat. Jack Gray said, I've got to get my points up. And then he gave a super chat to do just that.
O son of Adam, spend. I will spend on you. Give, then I will give you. It's difficult because you know what? These are my last few. As it is, the price is going up, the rand is going down, this is happening. Excuses. Those are excuses. You give and watch what Allah does.
Which, as we learned earlier, is apparently leave you with no money so that you have to loan out your armor to a Jew in order for your family to have food.
Well, he was desperately giving away everything
Yeah,
because he was afraid of going to
taking
hellfire. So that whole thing about
exactly.
give sadaqah, like that's what he was doing. He was giving up everything before he died, so he doesn't go to hellfire, and then nobody has any food. So like the last few things he owned, he had to go. And
yeah, so he was following the
right.
advice of these prosperity hadith preachers, and he was donating and donating and donating so that he would earn lots of reward. You'd think that being the prophet of Allah and supposedly never sinning in his entire life would be sufficient to get him into paradise, but apparently not. Of course, he did actually sin, and that's why he repented of his sin 70 times a day, but Muslims say he didn't. So I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, but that's why it says that the Quran specifically says that he's going, Allah's going to forgive you of all your sins, right? So, yet, haram. Well, apparently Allah is not going to give you any interest in it because it's the interest that's haram, and yet He's going to pay you back many, many times, and yet give you no interest. It's not interest. Allah is not calling it interest. He's calling it extra rewards, and so it doesn't count.
And we don't know that Muhammad was that the Jew was receiving interest for that loan he gave Muhammad. So loans themselves are not haram. It's interest that is haram. So as long as you have a fee equivalent to interest or a contract of double buying or one of the other tricks they use, it's not haram, because we all know that it's all about the letter of the law. That's exactly how the true God operates, I'm sure. Good reminder here from Dom Yan before we go. Hubal, Balal, Allah, smash Allah, like button.
I love special law. Yes, that's what Ahmed ex-Muslim is saying. He always says smash the law, which makes me giggle every time because he means smash the like button. So,
and a relevant comment here from John Wilson, who has looked into the times of lunar and solar eclipses during the time Muhammad was alive in this area. Could he possibly have seen one? If so, there's a date. And
yeah, I just talked about, I had found that. So I found that in the year before he goes. So in 621, James of Edessa, that's Edessa, not Odessa. James of Edessa had put an eclipse in his chronicle, and he said that an eclipse of the sun was visible there. So he would have seen one, and that is actually the year that we are looking for the moon being split or whatever. So what Muhammad thought had happened is that the moon caught up to the sun and smashed into it, because previously it said that Allah makes them swim in their separate orbs and they never run into each other. But he apparently freaked out because he thought it was the world and started spouting the beginning of this particular hadith. And then there are all these hadith about an eclipse. It doesn't say lunar or solar, so apparently it was solar, that he was bowing and praying frantically and was absolutely terrified for the entirety of the eclipse. So you would think that Allah's messenger would know that this was coming or that it was no big deal, but he didn't. He thought the world was coming and was coming. So now Muslims are told to continuously pray whenever there's an eclipse. So
let's just take one last comment from business here. Before I say anything, business, if you are listening, I want you to type pineapple in the chat. No one else needs to type that, just business. Type the word pineapple in the chat, or I will know that you are not listening and I will block you. So he says Arab Christians use the same name for the creator to this day, so your entire theory is a lie. Some Arab Christians use the same term, but guess what? They borrowed it from Islam. This has absolutely nothing to do with the theory. Absolutely nothing to do with the theory. You want to say something too?
Yeah, I'm just waiting to see whether or not he is actually going to say anything. I don't know how long the quote is. So Robert Morey, I don't think I've read Robert Morey, Pagan Islam, really quickly. Oh, it's a moon god myth. Yeah, I don't think that the people. So if you went up to somebody at the time of Muhammad and you said to one of the pagans and you said, "Hey, is Allah the god of the moon?" They'd say, "Well, Allah made the moon. Allah is in charge of the moon. Allah is like." We look for the moon when we look for Allah, but they would not at that point. That had already worn off. So the overall shape of the moon stuff that shaped the religion is still there to this day, right? It was still there to this day, but what you don't have is a recognition of Allah as being a moon god, even by the pagans. That's why you don't find Muhammad going, "Hey guys, this Allah is not a moon god. He is instead whatever," because he does say, "Hey guys, he doesn't have daughters. Instead, these are angels, and they are only obedient to Allah. So you should just pray to Allah and not to these angels." Muhammad doesn't engage with it because that wasn't still part of the belief system. Yes, he was historically a moon god. Yes, his moon godness still shaped the religion. Yes, it shapes the religion to this day, including Islamic terms right now that people are using are only in use because of this moon godness. However, the people of Muhammad's day would not have recognized Allah directly as a moon god because it had kind of worn off of him over the last couple of centuries. Because I think most likely around 250 was when the Kaaba was built, but nobody was living there until 430. Many years later, it was just like something that people would visit once a year briefly and then go away. And in that interim, this moon godness just got forgotten and lost, but only the surroundings, the trappings that are still there, right?
And Christopher says, isn't logic anathema to Allah? And Una answered that question is haram, because philosophy places logic, reasoning, and intelligence over divine revelation. And this was a debate in early Islam, and indeed it was declared a heresy, and they were kicked out. Well, kicked out might be a nice way to put it. They were thrown in jail and in some cases killed, those who were doing philosophy, which of course really just means thinking logically about things. There are, of course, Muslims today who don't follow that. But as far as the history of Islam goes, absolutely, thinking is haram.
Well, I mean, it is, yeah, it is like anathema and haram kind of have very similar meanings, but if it's stronger than that, it's I would say takfir, the like declare you to be an infidel.
Yep.
So yeah.
Just a couple quick comments and we'll wrap up. Colton Connor says we have 3 Baal worshippers who disliked the video. I would agree with that. I'm sure they are Baal worshippers, even if Baal worshippers, even if they don't know. Not Bilal, not Bilal, the friend of Muhammad, but Baal. Sorry about that. And then these last couple comments are along the same lines here. Did you see that conversation with Robert Spencer and Daniel Hikaju that Daniel did? We're proud of that line, apparently referencing Ali Dawa's line. And Colton says Islam is 99% violence, 1% misunderstood. Houston says Islam is 90% abrogated, 10% violence. Of course, Daniel in that conversation said that, oh, Islam is only 5% violence. Why are you always talking about that instead of the other 95%? So we agree. Islam is 5% violence. And now we're going to find out what the other 95% is. Robert Spencer has agreed to come on the channel. It'll be his first time on. He'll be joined by myself, of course, Mary, Derek from Your Brother in Christ, and Christian Hijab. And we will be figuring out what that 95% is. Things like, oh, it's only 2% child marriage. Why is everyone always against Islam? Only 2% of it is child marriage, and so forth, until we get to 100%. Because in reality, 5% violence is a lot. If you think about that, that's like over an hour of violence a day. And I agree, it's probably only 5% of the time that Muslims are being violent when they're following Sharia, but that's 5% too much. So that'll be next Friday, but since people were referencing it, I wanted to go ahead and get that out because I couldn't resist these percent comments. They're just too perfect to highlight that. Any closing thoughts from you, Mary?
Business. Go back and watch the beginning. Quit saying, aha, I have a point, and then repeating it whenever I have answered it like 8 times. I went over it in quite a bit of detail at the beginning. So
plus, he said, I just got here, which is a lie because he's been spamming the chat for close to an hour. And I told him when I timed him out the most recent time that he needed to watch the stream and figure out the word that I had just said, or I would permanently block him when he came out of timeout. I'm sure he saw that. So guess what? Hide user on this channel. Bye-bye, business. When you grow up, and you create a new username, feel free to come back and actually have a conversation with us. Or, feel free to call in. You don't have to be, you're not blocked on the call in, you're only blocked on YouTube. But because you weren't listening and just kept spamming the same crap that we refuted a dozen times, guess what? I have no interest in putting up with any more of your spam. And Jamal says 95% sex. That's not fair.
Even Connor writes pineapple. It's like, I'm listening. 95% sex, yes.
Yeah, see, that's not fair, Jamal. Even if you're having sex with all 9 of your wives in one evening and taking only one bath, you got to at least have like 1% of the time you're taking a bath, plus the rest of the day you're not having sex with your 9 wives. So it's definitely not 95%. It's only like, I don't know, 10 or 20% of Islam is about sex. There's lots of diversity in Islam. We get to find out lots of great things that Islam teaches. Anyway, for any closing thoughts from you for real, since you got distracted by business when I asked.
So closing thoughts are basically that what you see is actually a lot more nuanced than what you might have thought. Because, I'm into this. You read Ibn Ishaq and you have this, there are 360 idols, and it's like this teeming paganism with as many gods as you possibly can was kind of the image that you get. But then you go into the poetry, you go into the actual Theophoric names, you go into the inscriptions, you see all of these things. And instead, picture that you get that, yes, this had absolutely pagan origins. Wad was the first god, and Wad was a god of snakes, moon, love, and then you get Hubal, who is Baal, and there's divination from Wad. Baal gets added the divination. He gets the moonness. He gets the daughters of the 3 daughters, and he gets his weather aspects, and he gets all of this, and he gets the name Allah from this. And then over time, you see that they're interacting with monotheism in a world where polytheism is collapsing, and where they've put their stake down in this polytheistic soil. They're like, we have to defend this polytheism. We have to defend all of these pagan rites associated with this pagan place. How are we going to do it? And there is this big propaganda push and this big Allah over Hubal push, and this new casting and this reimagining of this pagan shrine and this pagan god and his pagan pantheon that's with him in a way that they think is more compatible with being able to withstand the rhetoric of the Christians, especially the Christians, but even the Zoroastrians, even the Jews, like even though they're not even seeking converts, right? They still, to any old-fashioned pagan, their system seems very wanting in contrast. And so it's this attempt to come up with something that can be against Christianity by saying that, yes, we're like this too, but we're better and we're more Arab. We're the place for the Arabs to come, and we are true to our heritage. We're true to our fathers, and yet we do worship this creator. So that is the picture that we get in these sources that is kind of surprising. And again, I've been reading all sorts of people. I've been reading the people who are like, oh, Allah never, or Muhammad never existed, this is totally made up. I've been reading everybody. But the people who are bringing me information with evidence is where I am here. This is the information that gives me evidence, and I think that this is really the picture that we've got here, and Muhammad fits perfectly into this. He is the rhetorician who is going to bring this pagan Kaaba into a monotheistic world, and that is my summary of what I find about
all right today. So a couple quick comments here. DeLeon Libredo says that I'm wrong, right? He said, when I said it's only like 10% or 20%, Saxy says, what are you talking about? They have 70 years of continual ejaculation and Jenna. And I would just say that this is totally, completely false because they're not ejaculating. They're only having sex without ejaculating. And then they finally, after 70 years, then they climax and ejaculate. So completely different. But Phil wants to know who cleans up all the semen and Jenna.
Wait, I've got a question
Sure.
about that. I've got a question suddenly about Muhammad's sex life if he thinks that that is what men really want. They have to spend 70 years before they get to go wee one time. That does not sound quite like what was on the package. I'm just saying.
Yes, definitely.
Hey, that provides some evidence for my theory about Muhammad's function. Right there.
Indeed,
right?
indeed. Jack says, ouch, that must hurt. Anyway, Phil wanted to know who cleans up all the semen in Jenna. And fortunately, Una has the answer for that. It's the janitors that clean the Kaaba. Great reference to the start of the stream there, Una. They're the luckiest people in Jenna.
Right.
Okay. There was a super chat from Colton as well.
O son of Adam, spend. I will spend on you. Give, then I will give you. It's difficult because you know what? These are my last few. As it is, the price is going up, the rand is going down, this is happening. Excuses. Those are excuses. You give and watch what Allah does.
The super chat there, or super sticker, says game over. Thank you for all your support today. And guys, this is just wrong how much you're making me laugh at your comments here. Colt says that's some huge backbone. I'm sure that people probably understand that reference. And Cecil says, talk about build up. And finally, John Wilson says they have to use plenty of wads with a capital W, referencing the god of pre-Islamic Arabia.
Guys. Yes, I do look like AI right now. I'm so
all right, so we're going to close out now. Just a couple quick announcements. Within the next day or two, I will have a not technically scripted video, but will be released as a video. You may remember ages ago, I had an interview with MK and we discussed jihad. I recorded about like 6 other interviews with him way back in May, and I started editing them. I never quite finished. I wanted to get them all ready before I released any. And I finally got back to that this week. And I'll be releasing the first one within the next couple of days, and then maybe like 2 or 3 weeks release another one, and so forth. The first one will be on child marriage, going through all of the criteria to, all the Islamic sources, discussing whether or not this is allowed, and the criteria of when you are allowed to have sex with your wife. Of course, there's nothing about husbands because no one cares about the woman. It's just when the man is allowed to have sex with the woman. And Jack Ray snuck in another super chat. He says, pain, pain. Well, I guess I'll continue off other announcements. So that should be out in the next 2 days. Bible study on Friday. I invited 2 different Muslims who said that they wanted to have chats with me to conversations on Saturday and Sunday. Neither one has gotten back to me. I just poked them both again, one yesterday and one today, because my initial replies were, that was about a week after my initial reply. If neither of them followed through, I'm going to probably try to get David S. on to talk about Dawa propaganda. And maybe we'll have this last video. If not, I'm sure that we've probably seen enough videos. Anyway, oh, and look at this. Business is back, even though I hit him on this channel. So that must be another user account with the same name. And guess
Yeah,
what?
it's
That
another
one's hidden
user.
on this channel too. Real geniuses in Islam.
Watch from the beginning, business. If you show understanding and you stop asking the same question
Yep.
over
So
and over again, then you can interact.
I know that
That's
there's
the
no point
issue.
in me.
Here's the sadness. We are running out of funds. All our work is going to stop unless people like you watching this video will help us. Your donations can get you a share in a reward. Reap those rewards for years to come, inshallah. This is not a donation or a charity, but an investment for your hereafter.
And that was some good timing there. Listening to Alwi Dawa is definitely pain. And I know there's no point in saying this, which is then when the thing started to play, which is why I said that it was good timing. But there is actually no point in saying this because I know business isn't listening to me. But for any other Muslim who happens to see this, email me, that is at reasonanswers.com, found in the description of every video. And I will set up a time to discuss whatever topic you want in a nice, friendly conversation. But I know you're just going to hide in comments, or you'll agree to come on, and then when I try to set an actual date, you'll stop emailing me. That's happened countless times. I was referencing that earlier. 99% of Muslims ignore the request. The other 1%, they contact me, and more than half of those never actually follow through either. So there you go. Maybe someday we'll have another good chat with a Muslim. The only ones that ever seem to talk to me are ones that hold heretical views, and thus they already know that they're condemned by Islam anyway, so then they don't mind coming on and having chats with me, or who are just too incredibly stupid to understand what's going on, like Bob or Saeed or Safraz, although Safraz was intelligent enough to realize that he was doing damage to Islam and has given up doing public chats. Anyway, hopefully I'll get some Muslims on. Hopefully we'll have some conversations soon. We had many Muslims in the chat today. None of them came up and talked to us. They all just spammed the chat.
We had a lot come out last time. We had a lot come up last time, but I think people are really scared of this topic and don't want to come up. I think that's the reason why everybody's staying away who might chat today. But here's the thing. If you're brave enough to come up, nobody will talk about the topic. We will talk about other things. But you have to actually get your backside up.
Yep.
Backside up here.
And if Mary's too scary for you, you're too afraid of being humiliated by a half-brain woman, you can email me. You can review my previous chats. You can see that I'm very friendly with people. I take far more flack from Christians saying that I'm too nice to Muslims than people who actually watch the conversations who say that I'm too mean. So there you go. And one wanted to know what the redeem stat is. See my website, reasonanswers.com/points.html to learn about the point system. And next time you can trigger some animations with redeems yourself. Until we meet again, everyone, take this information, use it in conversations with Muslims. Have a great rest of your day, whether it's just beginning or coming to an end. Go and serve the Lord. God bless everyone.